So today we're going to be talking about how time and Einstein and the universe and largely these are just opinions people have, but all of these opinions put together give you guys like an overview of what the universe really is, and also how it's possible that time exists all at once, why it's possible to time travel in a sense according to science, and all of that kind of stuff. So I thought that these videos would be quite interesting. I've put them in an order I think will logically progress. I don't necessarily agree with some of them, but I thought they were interesting, so I thought we'd watch them. So, and also at any point, if you want to discuss it, although I need to also pull this out. If at any point you want to discuss, the point is not to watch videos. This is not really. Let's just put that here so I can monitor the stream. It's not just to watch videos. It's also about to discuss. I mean, sometimes there's no discussion, so we just watch them and then that's it. If at any point you got comments, make comments and I'll pause the video and we'll talk about it. Some of the videos are relatively short, so there's like this one's only 6 minutes. There's kind of no point in really starting it all the time. And some of them are longer. I left the longest one for the end. We'll see how that goes if we watch it or not. But basically, it's going through the scientific reasons of why, like literally, like Einstein's theory, what's it, special relativity and special relativity, and then there's obviously people's opinions about it and theories and like trying to explain it, and also like some of the other videos are, well, yes, that's one of them. That's one of them, Jezza. When people are reborn, they are essentially jump to a specific point of existence. And then some of the other videos are about, does the universe exist? And like how science and that how go a little bit of explanation of how we perceive it. This is why I always say we are perceiving time. We are not experiencing. Well, we're experiencing it because we're perceiving it, but it's not that it's outside of us, and then we are in time. No, we are perceiving time because we are perceiving it. Like actually, Captain and I have talked about. Well, I've talked to her about it. There's certain things that I do. I don't perceive any time. Then I just don't perceive time, and then I realize, in terms of earthly terms, a lot of time has passed. Hey, I've got a thingy on my face, and and in time. But that's in a sense, how time stands still, or just we don't perceive it as moving. So our perception of time is what makes time tick. I don't have a watch here. My watch is on my bedside. So we watch the time. We're watching something happening. So I thought these videos were very, very interesting. And in an overall sense, it explains what the universe is, what it isn't. If you think purely just on a human level, then of course half of this stuff is airy-fairy, doesn't make any sense. But yet, great scientists have had these kind of downloads of information where they literally try to explain it with science. So hopefully this will give you like an indication of how what we think is not necessarily true. And that's not to say that like, go off into like a crazy, nothing matters, everything. No, it just gives you a different perspective on our perspective of time. Yeah, I don't. It's weird. Like I usually know what time of day it is. I can, within like sort of half an hour, I can tell you what time of day it is without having a watch, without even looking at the sun. I just more or less always know what the cycle is, but I can't tell you what day it is. Like I have no idea what day it is today, and I have it on my desktop. Today is the 21st. As those fancy people say, the day of our Lord, 21st. So I think this expands your idea. I think specifically the group of videos together expand your idea of what the universe is and what time is and how it all works together. So 22nd for you. You see, that's what some of these videos are about. That's it's going to use that exact example, Jezza, of how it's perceived. I don't know if I could tell if I was in a windowless room for long enough. I'm not sure I would know either. And then I definitely would lose track of time. Mm. And that's what these videos will kind of get into. Some of them are quite interesting. I can't remember. I don't remember. I watched some of them because they were very short. And then some of the long ones I didn't watch. So I thought I'd just watch them with you. I just watched the beginning just to see if it was the kind of stuff that I'd want to watch. If I wanted to watch it, then I bookmarked it. Well, I actually download them because they run smoother and easier, and I don't have interference on the screen and pop-up adverts and all sorts of shit. And then, actually, never mind. Then I can pop out the links if I've got them in the right order. If not, well, tough shit. That's this one we're going to watch now. Yeah, it feels the same, but it does. It depends on how absorbed you are by a task or a subject. If like this is why I want to get a keyboard. I was actually showing Jizza what I think. I mean, we're talking about almost 40 years ago when my parents got it for me, the Casio Tone organ type keyboard. And he said, "That's so cool. It looks so retro." I said, "Yeah, but it was absolute crap." I mean, it was a solidly built machine. If it had been capable of MIDI, I would never have sold it. I probably still have it. Well, I probably wouldn't have it today, but I would probably still have it. But it's just useless. It's useless. It only does some really tacky internal sounds. That's it. So it's a real pity because it was solidly built. It was a beautiful machine. It just didn't make very nice music. So, like usually if I sit down at the piano, I would be gone for like a few hours. I would just go just away, and then suddenly after a while, I realized my back is sore, my fingers are sore, I'm getting tendinitis, and yeah, then I'd realize, okay, some time has passed. Right, so let's play the song. Hopefully everything's okay. If this from the sounds or whatever, just let me know. The Well.
Sometimes people want to say, no, we definitely don't experience reality the way that it actually is. And some people want to say, yes, we do. Philosophers have been arguing about this for like as long as philosophy has existed. The question of, does your experience match reality, or are you really experiencing reality in its stark objective truth? And the answer is simply, not exactly. Reality for us is what we can sense with our sensory surfaces and what we can make sense of with the signals in our brain. The signals in our brain are as necessary for our experience of reality as the sensory signals that come from the world. So I'm going to use a metaphor to describe how the brain works. It goes something like this. Your brain, my brain, everybody's brain, is trapped in its own dark, silent box called your skull. And the brain has no knowledge of what is going on around it in the world or in the body, right? Because it's in this skull. And it's receiving sensory signals from the sensory surfaces of your body. These signals are the outcomes of some changes in the world or in the body. But the brain doesn't know what the changes are. It's receiving the outcomes. And that is what philosophers and scientists call the reverse inference problem. You start with an outcome and you have to guess at the cause. For example, if you hear a loud bang, it could be a car backfiring, a door slamming, it could be a gunshot. Your brain doesn't know what the causes are, it only knows the effect. And so it has to guess. And the guess is important, right? Because you would do different things if it's a gunshot versus if it's a windy day that slammed a door. And luckily, it has one other source of information, and that is your past experience. The really cool thing about this, if that wasn't cool enough, is that it's actually doing it predictively. Sometimes scientists talk about this as the brain running a model of the world. But the brain is not running a model of the world. The brain is running a model of its body. And it's doing it in this really interesting way. In psychology, a group of instances which are similar is called a category. In essence, what your brain is doing when it's making a prediction, it's creating a category of instances from the past which are similar in some way to the present in order to predict what's going to happen next, what the brain has to do next, and what your experience will be next. And so when a human brain is creating a category, you have to ask, what features of similarity is it using? Is it these sensory and motor features? An apple is round, an apple is hard and crunchy, or is it these abstract features, abstract multimodal summaries of patterns of features? I could take a bunch of apples and I could say, well, these are good for baking and these are not good for baking. And these patterns, this summary, only exists in your brain. Because our brains are structured to construct categories based on the function
Barney
of
and
things
his psychic
rather
dog.
than what they
Here,
look
buddy,
like
buddy.
or taste like or smell like. Humans can create something called social reality, which is where we collectively impose a function on objects that the objects don't have by virtue of their physical nature. So a really good example of this is money, little pieces of paper. We all agree that these little pieces of paper have a function of value. And it turns out that many things that we think of as being part of reality are actually like this. We can draw lines in the sand and create the borders of countries, which creates categories of people called immigrants and
Someone
citizens.
totally said a naughty word.
We can
I like
create governments because we all agree that certain actions, like making little tick marks, has a meaning to elect someone into a position that has certain powers. It's a form of social reality. In our lab, we work on the hypothesis that many psychological categories are forms of social reality. We impose a meaning on a scowling face that it did not evolve to have, but because we all agree that it has that meaning or that function in a particular culture, then it does. To say that your brain resides in a dark, silent box doesn't mean that you are trapped in that box. Your brain has this wonderful capacity to take bits and pieces of past experience and create something completely new that you've never experienced before. We call it imagination. That's a double-edged sword, right? Because our brains are so good at imagining and creating predictions that are not yoked to our immediate surroundings, sometimes we have a lot of trouble staying in the present. You have to practice your ability to control how much you want to be constrained by what's going on outside that box and how much you want to be free of it.
Right. Yeah, I just want to mute my phone. I think it's muted. Because nobody ever contacts me. They will make sure to contact me when I'm streaming. Yes, I thought that's a good one to start with because it explains how your reality is perceived and how it's created by your brain. So it is true in that medical sense, scientific sense, that your brain creates it literally creates the 3D matrix that we imagine. So we see pancakes and we remember smelling it and tasting it and the sensations and the steam coming off. So we just look at either an image or we get a smell and it creates it puts gonna get breakfast, all right. So it creates the whole picture, the whole reality around a snippet of information. So that's important. That most people go through their whole lives without even understanding it. They just think, "Oh no, this is all totally real." I said no, because if I had to create, well, I have created like a smell machine that has this synthetic. Basically, all the shit that they put in all our products is all synthetic, and that machine releases a certain fragrance. Like let's say it's citrus, it will remind you of something, and in your brain you will create something. If I show you a video, so it can become very immersive, and most people don't really get that. They just take it for granted. They just presume, oh, this is real. No, you're imagining it's real. So that's an interesting one. Let me just post the. Why is my mouth stuck? Just post the link again, so people can go and support the people, whatever. Give it a like, etc. I just like, I guess, because it's clean. It's format. It's got no fucking adverts and no other distracting stuff in the videos this way. But there's the links. Well, we're not going to discuss immigration here tonight, so you're more than welcome to chat about it, but I'm not going to get into it because I'm trying to have a discussion about this. So I'm going to keep discussing about this. We can discuss about it afterwards when I'm done, but I can't clip this unless... No, you can carry on. I'm just not going to address it because then I can't copy this and I can't put it on YouTube. It's all just a mess. Just a whole lot of people talking over anything. That's what we normally have here, just random, disorganized chaos. That's fine on other, when I'm doing a non-organized stream. But yeah, I'm just not going to join in because now I've got like a whole lot of time where I'm just talking about something that has nothing to do with the topic. So, all right. I don't know what this one's about. What is this one about? Let me look at my notes. So this video is about how the physicists prove that the universe isn't real. I don't know. You always have these stupid. Let me copy that link. You always have these silly, statements. They've proved shit. They've done shit. No, they just have an opinion half of the time. So opinions are interesting, if they have some scientific basis or some logic. Or at least if they're just interesting. I like opinions that are interesting. People with stupid opinions don't interest me. It's like, yeah, you got nothing to teach me. Move on. So how physicists prove that the universe isn't real. It's more of a clickbait video. But however, some of these were quite interesting. So I thought that it gives you a basis of what the universe actually is, not your perception of it. So I think if anybody's got any comments about what we've discussed so far, feel free. Otherwise, I'll just play the next video. The first ones are relatively short. Yeah, it is personally relative. It's a perspective. This is why I keep saying to people, stop trying to change the universe. Stop trying to change the world. It's not your universe to change. You just simply change your world. You change the way. It's like flipping a channel. If you don't like something, move to a place on the planet that is more like what you like. Don't participate in the system that you don't like, because most people just participate. They just go along with everything, and then they complain. They say you gave up your right to complain when you didn't make a change. Then you gave up. You can still complain. I'm just not going to listen. And people say you're very intolerant. I said no, I'm just not. I am very intolerant of stupidity. It's like if I tell you, if you put your hand in the fire, you're going to get burnt, and you're not a child, and you're an adult, and you do it, and it burns. And say, what? I told you this. I gave you the reasoning. I told you scientific stuff. It's hot. Your skin is not. It's going to get, I told you all of this and explained it to you, and you did it the first time. The first time I can still understand. You want to experiment. The second time, it's just stupidity. It's like, what part about the first time when you burnt your hand? So this kind of stuff. And this is with everything. It's like with politics. When people go, oh, when we vote in XYZ, insert name here, then he'll change everything. I said, really? Because for the last, I don't know, maybe 4,000 or 5,000 years, things have changed. Yeah, they've changed, haven't they? Yeah, no. So so people need to get out of their mindset. So what Barney said about being relative is absolutely true. We don't need to change the world. We need to show people what it isn't. And that's it. And that's what I'm hoping these videos about time and the universe and all that will help. And they realize that you are actually in a hamster wheel that you have agreed to be in. You can make plans to somehow get out of this hamster wheel. Sometimes it requires change, like giving up contracts to Netflix and iPhones and things, and going to live like Barney did, go live in the tent and hike and and be independent. Because sometimes that's what it takes. It takes the letting go of what we hold as a comfort zone, even if it's very uncomfortable. Yeah, it is hard to wait. But anyway, I'll address all of that, Marnie, off stream. You are panicking again about stuff that is really not a panic. There are ways for everything. Okay, there's a way for everything. You just have to stop. You not panic about it and find a way. And technically, there's always a way. Sometimes it takes a little bit of extra money. Sometimes it just takes a bit of planning. Yeah, well, that's because you're becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy, Barney. It's very hard. I know I'm also guilty of that. But the only way it stops is you've got to stop that. You've got to stop, even if you just stop saying it. It goes a long way. So, right. So I'm going to play this one and give you some more stuff to.
On October 4th, Alain Aspect, John Clauser, and Anton Zeilinger were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics for proving that the universe isn't locally real. What I love about this story is that it's a story of quite literally some of the smartest people who have ever lived being confused, and how ultimately Einstein was proven wrong, which doesn't really happen all that often. That idea of locally real is made up of two concepts. Locality is the idea that things are only affected by their local environment. You can't flick a switch in another galaxy hundreds of light years away and instantly see the results here, because nothing, not even information, can travel faster than light. Realness, though, is much harder to explain, and that is the focus of the Nobel Prize. Let's start close to the beginning, around the 1930s, where there were two paradigms, two ways of thinking about the physics of small things, like particles, atoms, electrons, photons, etc. The view of Einstein and many others was that the universe is real, that particles, atoms, and electrons have definite properties that are inherent to them, regardless of if they are being measured. Essentially, that if a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, it does in fact make a noise. And then there was a countergroup, the anti-realists, championed by people like Bohr as well as many others, that particles have properties that haven't really made up their minds until you actually go out and measure them. That they exist in a wave function of possible states, and only when you actually take a measurement do they really make up their minds. The famous example here is that of Schrödinger's cat that is both alive and dead until you look in the box, and then ultimately you go to prison. This back and forth between Bohr and Einstein culminated in a famous paper called the EPR paper, where Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen put forward a thought experiment that they thought perfectly highlighted that quantum mechanics at best was incomplete and at worst may be totally wrong. Their thought experiment focused on an idea in quantum mechanics called entanglement, that the property of two particles can be inherently related. Their line of reasoning for their thought experiment started with, well, we know that energy is conserved. Things don't suddenly start moving in a direction unless someone or something pushes or pulls them. Neither also do they suddenly start spinning, rotating, jumping up and down, or doing anything else unless someone else is directly affecting them. Number two, if we start with a small quantum mechanical particle that isn't spinning, moving, or doing anything else, let's imagine that particle spontaneously breaks into two. If we look at one of those pieces it breaks into and find that it's moving to the right, we know instantly that the other particle must be moving to the left to conserve momentum. Or if we had looked at it and found that it was spinning one way, maybe clockwise, we would know instantly that the other particle must be spinning counterclockwise to conserve angular momentum. You'd be confused if you looked at this system and saw both particles suddenly moving to the right. Your intuition would tell you that some outside force maybe must have hit them. Or for the same reason, though maybe less intuitively, because most people don't think about angular momentum or spin, you'd be equally surprised if you saw both particles rotating in the same direction. You'd assume that something must have hit them and caused them both to start spinning. Step 3. Quantum mechanics here says these states are impossible to know before you go out and measure them. If you separated these particles light years apart and measured one, say, and found that it was spinning clockwise, you'd know instantly, even if that particle was a universe away, that its counterpart must be spinning counterclockwise. But how could this be? If they really only take on a definite value when you measure them, and the other one always needs to be the opposite of what you've measured, then the particle that you did measure would need to instantaneously communicate to its partner and tell it to adopt the opposite value permanently. Einstein argued that this was impossible because it would have violated locality and meant that information had traveled instantly faster than the speed of light to tell the other particle to collapse its wave function and make up its mind which way it was spinning. Instead, he argued, it must have made up its mind at the very beginning, when it was created. We just didn't know it, or we weren't smart enough yet to find a good way of measuring it. He called this unknown knowledge hidden variables, and said that this was the piece in quantum mechanics that was yet to be completed. And for around 30 years, physicists really kind of split into two groups. Either they sided with Einstein or they sided with Bohr. Mostly because no one had really come up with a good theoretical or experimental counter-argument to Einstein's EPR paper. That was until about 1964, when John Bell, an Irish physicist on sabbatical from working at CERN, started to do some more theoretical work of his own. These works, which were later called Bell's theorem or Bell's inequalities, of which there are many different forms, but the underlying idea is to try and get the universe to pick a side, tell us whether there's hidden variables and Einstein's right, or tell us whether truly there is a wave function and that quantum mechanics is real. Now this hinges a lot on what happens to quantum objects when you actually go out and measure them. So let me introduce you to the idea for a particle of light called a photon. Photons have a property called polarization, which describes which way the wave of light is oscillating through space, either vertically or horizontally, or potentially somewhere in between. If you wanted to measure which state a photon was in, you would put it through a polarizer that lets through either vertical light in one orientation, or it will only let through horizontal light in another orientation. But then at least your detector, which you place behind that polarizer, knows what sort of light it's detecting. If you fired in randomly polarized light, some of it vertical, some of it horizontal, some of it in between, by placing a vertical polarizer first, then a horizontal polarizer after, you would expect correctly to see that no light reached your detector because all polarization angles had been blocked. You can see this effect when using polarizing films, which are the same stuff you find on a pair of polarizing sunglasses. By orienting two polarizing films at 90 degrees to each other, you see no light emerges through them. What is interesting here is that if you place a third polarizer between these two, you suddenly, and I think quite counterintuitively, start to see more light. This is because fundamentally, measuring a particle changes its state, allowing light to slip through the final polarizer where usually it wouldn't be able to. So you start to see more light than you would otherwise expect. So let's jump back though into the story. At this point in history, Bell's work was still more theory and thought experiment than anything else. And that classically is the problem with theoreticians. If you look at them from a distance, it just looks like a wizard trying to have an argument with you. Physicists really needed to find a way of actually completing an experimental measurement. One of the early and most elegant and now heavily evidenced
talking about all that, what I want to point out at this point is that we are hey Simon, how are you doing? We are analyzing, evaluating, and scientifically measuring something that is actually a perception. So
I can handle it. I was built for this shit. So I'm gonna be hanging out with my daughters today. I'll be dropping in here and there. Like I said, don't thank me, thank yourself. And if you really want to show your appreciation, tell a friend, because that friend will tell.
Now, where was I? We are measuring something within the confines of a perception. This is what blows most people's minds. Okay, so scientists are being all scientific and empirical, and I believe in empiricism. I do. Without empiricism, you've really just got a lot of fucking opinions that really amount to nothing. It's just people's opinions. With empiricism, you can actually measure something. However, you are still measuring it within the perception. So, like, how do you like we were using the color orange? Okay, all right, Monica Wakey. Thank you very much for your day. So we are measuring the color of an orange within the perception that gives that orange life, in a sense, existence. Okay, so if of course, if we say this is not a simulation, this is all very real, and then we die, and then this, the simulation carries on without us. Basically, that's what we're saying. So that's all there is. The end. So if we say that, then of course, then there's no discussion. But that's not what the discussion's about. This discussion is a little bit beyond that. So if we are measuring the color of an orange, first of all, now I'll throw even more spanners into the works. I can't now because it'll fuck up my system. If I go and I fiddle with the color of my studio lights, I will suddenly start becoming very red or very blue. Like if I go and just flip the switch on the top lights, which are just those cheap LEDs in the ceiling, the blue, like that bluish light, then I will look kind of purplish, bluish. Okay, so am I purple? What color am I? At that particular time, you will be perceiving it as the conditions have created. However, if you're colorblind, like Barney also mentioned, and I've mentioned this many, many times before, you don't really see blues. So a colorblind person would then perceive me as being gray, like my beard, So that's what I'm saying. We need to stop looking at things as absolutes because we are perceiving something. And if you trick your brain long enough, you will see what you want to see. And that's why people say, oh, anything is true. It's what you perceive. I said, in your dreamlike state, yes, it's true because you have decided it's true. However, the entire matrix that you have made true within is only true here in this matrix, this existence. Everything that people believe to be true, like in terms of worldly things, is only true while the simulation is running. It's like playing a game. While you're playing the game, the zombies chasing you. As soon as you exit the game, the zombies stop chasing you. And that's what I'm always trying to make people see about life, or we call life. We don't. It's weird. We don't call the spiritual life a life. We just call human life a life. But here is a wrench. Who's the master perceiver? Maybe there's no master perceiver, Barney. That's what I keep saying to people. There's no master perceiver because this is just a virtual reality for each and every single one of us. And it's colored via our perceptions. Like I was watching a series, an Australian a series called You Can't Ask That. It's just with an Australian accent. And they asked, like, for example, I think I can't remember, but there was something to do with that, with colorblindness and stuff. And it, like, what they perceive is normal. It's normal to them. So your perception of whatever it is your perception. Now, that's a whole other discussion, which I'm not really going to go into. Like, do other people affect your perception? Yes. Then there's another theory. If we created the whole perception, then we created these people that are affecting our perspective to challenge us to think differently. So there's that, but that's a whole alternative discussion, which is like it just derailed the whole conversation here. And then we have this very random stuff, which I don't mind on random streams, but like I'd like to stay on topic. Look at the coma patient who lives an entire life in a different way during the coma. Yeah. But that's what we're saying. So is it real? The whole point is people get stuck on what they perceive as real. Whether it is or not is immaterial. They decided that this is real. So for that person in this experience, it has become real because they have literally brainwashed themselves into believing stuff that is actually not true. It's only true, those parameters only fit that particular simulation. If you had to switch out the simulation, they'll go, oh my fuck, I've landed up on Mars or something, But it's true, and this is the challenge that we under the human perception are challenged with, is to come to the realization that it's a perception, and we have to find the way to tweak and find the switches to change the perspective. That is what we're here to learn, okay, or to experience. In a way, that's why we experience so much frustration, is because, like, on a soul level, the soul can pretty much, conceive. I mean, he conceived this experience, which I'm finding very annoying. So this is the thing. But the whole point of an enlightened person is to know this and go, okay, so this is the raw deal I've done for myself, or this is the good deal I've done for myself. Like what am I going to do about it? Well, you're going to experience it. No, it's not to say one is stuck experiencing unpleasant stuff. That's simply not true. Like I used to have a friend. I say used to because she does certain things that no friends really should do. And too many times when I really needed help, she kind of just walked away. So I thought, you know what? No, that's not a friend. Anyway, so she just perceived that she was cursed. He perceived that she was cursed. So it didn't matter what she did. It didn't matter how successful she was as a woman. None of that mattered. Okay, she was just cursed. So through her whole life, she had a cursed life because she created this reality. And her challenge, I don't know if she ever did, was to get out of this cursedness and to realize it was her own making. For example, for a woman, it's more difficult because men don't take you seriously, especially when you are in construction. She was what she called herself an interior architect. She used to do what I used to do. That's how we met. She used to do the same thing as I used to do back then. We used to design not just fast foods, but we used to do retail. So we used to design. So I designed things like Nando's. One company I actually worked on 1 or 2 Nando's. Mike's Kitchen, which I think it was just a local brand. Like all of these chains, we used to work on them. And that's how we. For some reason, she came to our office. That's how I got to know her. But she always just felt like some idiot told her that she was cursed, or whatever. You always get these weird gypsies type people, and not to mock gypsies, but these gypsy fortune tellers that wander around telling people horrible things when they should just keep their fucking mouths shut. So she fell into this pattern of believing it, even though she was successful. She was actually fairly successful. So it just gives us a challenge to overcome. It's just a chance. So at the end of the day, you die, and the realness goes away. That's the thing. So how real is it if we just kick the bucket, and poof, it's gone? So how real is it? How real was it? That's why we say to remind people that what you do take away, you don't take away your physical stuff, but you take away your memories, which is quite interesting because I've experienced that throughout my life as a human. I'm experiencing that, many times when I think back of things. Sometimes I have to stop and think, oh, wait a minute, I don't actually have these things anymore. It's like they're gone. But in my mind, they're as real. Maybe it's just because I'm a creative type person. From my mind, I can almost touch them. I can almost, use them, which sometimes is a little depressing. So this is kind of what the soul remembers these memories. Anyway, so that's why it's important, this part of the discussion, to discuss the perception is not important. People get hung up on the arguing, what color is an orange? Well, in Mexico, they're green. In other parts of the world, they're green until they're ripe. Sometimes they're very yellow. So they're actually more towards yellow than they are towards orange. It doesn't matter what color it is. What matters is the experience. Like I have 3 oranges in the fridge. I can tell you now, I'm going to experience them and I'm going to enjoy it. And if they're bitter. If they're bitter. Oranges are pretty rare here, at least where I live. Curse repellent. A tablet. You just put it up. All right, I'm going to carry on playing this one. Otherwise, I'm going to babble. It's not 10 minutes. There's only a few minutes left of this one.
Extensions of Bell's theorem work is the CH-SH inequality by John Clauser, the Nobel Prize winner that we're talking about here, Michael Horn, Abner Shimony, and Richard Holt. And their work here makes this theorem that Bell developed actually experimentally testable. The scenario they describe is similar to what we'd talked about before. 2 entangled photons are sent in opposite directions to 2 observers, Alice and Bob. Both Bob and Alice get a polarizer to play with into their setup that helps them determine which polarization the light is actually in. And finally, Alice and or Bob, at random, are told to rotate their polarizers over time and record whether photons arrive successfully or not at their detectors. What we're interested in doing here is counting how frequently that Alice and Bob agree on whether they've seen or not seen a photon. If Alice and Bob perfectly anti-align their polarizers, then they should always both either see a photon or neither one should see a photon. They should always agree on whether photons arrived or photons didn't arrive. If, however, Alice and Bob both align their polarizers, either Alice should see a photon and Bob shouldn't see one, or Bob should see a photon and Alice shouldn't see one. The interesting part happens at angles between these positions. If the universe is real and photons are truly independent, Alice and Bob's rate of agreement should linearly move between full agreement and full disagreement. If, however, the universe is not real, we should expect to see a higher rate of coincidence than otherwise expected, just like in our 3 polarizer setup, except now our polarizers are on the other side of the universe from each other, and the same photon isn't going through both. Or is it? This can only be true if the particles are really still connected to let each other know which polarization state to be in, so that measurement on one truly does affect measurement on the other. And in 1972, it was John Clauser who built the first experimental setup capable of conducting this measurement. In the paper that he released that year, this was the figure that he displayed, exactly matching the prediction of quantum mechanics, proving that the universe isn't locally real, that Einstein's deterministic view was incorrect. And the story from this point goes, I'm not sure if it really happened or not, that excited by proving the result, Clauser runs into Richard Feynman's office to tell him the news, and in classic Feynman fashion, Feynman throws him out of his office, forever doubting quantum mechanics, and tells him, good, now get on with some real physics. The other Nobel Prize recipients, Elaine Aspect and Anton Zeilinger, closed important loopholes that remained within this experiment, as well as showing that quantum entanglement can be transferred to other particles in a process called quantum teleportation. All this to say that without a doubt, the universe showed itself to be stranger than even Einstein had imagined. All of these phenomena are really the backbone of what is driving the modern quantum computing revolution. The idea that at some point in the hopefully near future, quantum computers will outperform classical computers because they have this inherent baked-in advantage that down at their core, their particles that run them are communicating to each other. What this doesn't prove, and I can absolutely forgive anyone for on first hearing thinking it, is that people can now communicate faster than light, or that it would be possible to derive some faster than light communication. That, unfortunately, is where the field pretty unanimously says no. This is ultimately because the core to this phenomenon is inherent randomness, at the source of that photon or entangled particle generation, and then also at those measurement points. Each photon will either make it or not make it through a polarizer. Each photon will either be created in some combination of states, but ultimately those combination of states will be impossible to know until measured. There's no way of loading information onto that communication channel. And as a result, there is no way of violating Einstein's fundamental contribution, which is that the speed of light is a fundamental limit in the universe. That absolutely stands correct, and I think would keep Einstein reasonably happy.
All right, so that's that one. Yeah, so that's I mean, it's an interesting discussion we're having. So like I keep saying it, people go, hey, and they just block you. So all right. Always block something you could learn from. It's the best policy. Just block everything that you don't like. So, as Jez and I were talking in the chat, is that there's only one truth. Something is only true if it's true. Like I say to people, most of the things I tell people, it's not because I want it to be that way. Because trust me, I'd really rather it be different, but it isn't. That is the way it is. So there's a lot of stuff I don't like. Like, if I was religious, I would say, I want to have a word with the man upstairs, but I know there's no man upstairs. The man upstairs is me, it's so, so there's certain things as a human, I don't particularly like. It's still true. It's just, that's the way it is. It's kind of, it's almost demonstrably true by not being true sometimes, by the reality that we, like when we see things that do not conform to our science, and then we go, oh, that must be magic, or that must be some trickery. Well, maybe it's just that what we believe is true is actually a fantasy. Or the Big Bang. I don't know if I've got something on the Big Bang here. I was watching something that was just complete nonsense. I don't know. I can't understand how people believe in the Big Bang, which what these videos progressively go into. Some of the other videos get even more interesting. It really makes you think about time. I mean, I know I've some of you probably have had these discussions before, but just when you see it put in that way, the one woman later on will talk about how we don't have any free will because of this theory. So it's quite interesting. I would still believe it. There's many things it's not even, you see, this is the thing. When it comes to this is now spiritually speaking and not scientifically speaking, which is why the two do not match. You can never argue between the two. You have to either, oh, for heaven's sake, work. Never mind. It's not even addressed to me. They just address it to everybody. And I just keep getting notifications. I mean, I get paid on a freelance basis. What the hell do I have to read these stupid messages? So now I've lost my train of thought. Maybe just exit it. The things I'll forget to switch it back on afterwards when I'm finished. Actually, I suppose I could mute it. Probably. I've never tried it, just exit it. No, I don't care. I don't get paid per hour. I mean, I get paid per hour. I don't get paid per day. What was I saying? So I've completely lost my train of thought. People need to understand science doesn't care about the truth. Yeah, no, science doesn't care about the truth. Science cares about making money. Modern science. It also cares about protecting your theory. So if you say that X, Y, and Z, then if people prove you wrong, then you look like an idiot. So for the most part, and I'm sorry to say this is a very sad indictment of humanity. For the most part, people do not wish to be proven wrong. So they will then they get a gang together. They gangs up on people. I mean, look at what happened to I forget his name. They used to believe the sun went around the earth. What was that? Galileo. And then what the horrible things they did to him, because how dare he go against the establishment? And I think he was imprisoned or something for the rest of his life. Something crazy. So that's science. That is our science. And people say, no, we've moved along. I said, no, we have not moved along at all, which is very easily provable by going onto the internet. I can prove all of this stuff wrong. I just can't be bothered anymore because I've done it for many years and people don't listen. So I say to people, go and research, then come and argue. In 200 years, we will know more than we knew yesterday, will we? That's the point. Yeah, will we? So I don't really, that's why I always say I don't really get source of information about spiritual stuff from anyone, because they generally don't really know a lot about it. So I want to be conversing with people who can that do know more than I do, or remember more than I do, so that I can also remember what I already know. So after retracting, yeah, I know, Barney. After retracting everything he muttered under his breath, yet he moves. So it's like, for example, everything you know about medicine today is a business. It started about 100 in the late 1800s. I think. I don't worry about it because I've looked into it. I've realized it. I've seen the facts. I don't pursue it anymore, and I don't get into discussions about it because people must do their own research, like I did. Black people should look into what the Spanish flu was in 1918. They should really look into that. They'd be very surprised that the government papers, official papers, and the experimentation that went on. So that's the thing. But people don't. People just automatically say that something is true without thinking about it. So that goes to this whole reality What part of it is actually true? Well, the only true part of this reality, this experience, is that you are experiencing something through a set of filters. That's the only thing that is true of this life. That is the only thing that we can actually not even prove, but it's the only thing we can be sure of, is that every single thing that we experience in this experience is our own experience. For example, if you lived in some remote corner of the world and you never watched television and you never went to school and you weren't in touch with like modern man, what would you believe? Would you believe that we've gone to the moon? Would you believe? What would you believe? That so to them, all of the stuff that we believe we are clever and we're living in the Western society, and most people look down on these people. Which reality is better? People say, "Oh no, but they don't know any." I said, "Yes, but which reality is better? Who leads a better reality, a more peaceful reality, a more spiritual reality?" So how advanced is the West? So it becomes a subjective question. And that's the whole point. Medicine said horsehair bandages were garbage because they worse. Hold on, I don't get your message. Medicine said horsehair bandages were garbage because they were sterile and wounds didn't fester. I'm not sure I understand that. When the Jamaicans saw the first plane fly over Jamaica, they swore it was a messenger angel sent by God. Yeah, because that was their perspective. Now, our perspective is that there are satellites going off to Mars. Again, that's a whole discussion. I've never seen one going off to Mars. So, for all I know, it's all faked. For all I know, it's all real. And that's when you approach the world in that way, you start to actually see. You don't just assume it is the certain way. You look at it, and you just sit and you stare and you look at it until you see the truth. But most people just go, "Oh, that's a tree. That's a palm tree. Must have coconuts." Well, actually, there's only one type of palm tree that gives you coconuts. So that assumption is already wrong. The ones we have here, at least here on the island, Mexico, give a lot of coconuts. But not all palms give coconuts. Some of them give a different type of fruit. But the perception is, because we've seen tropical paradises, and there was only actually one part or two parts of the world where they actually had coconuts. And now they spread to the world because, it's so pretty, it's a palm tree, it's like so tropical. So they planted them everywhere else. So our perspective, our perception is that we now have, coconut-bearing palms all over the world, where it simply wasn't true. You also get date palms, I suppose, and stuff. What a lovely bunch of coconut. Hello. So that's what we got to look at, the perception. So when we say, well, science has proven, no, science is an opinion. Science is wrong about many things. The one thing, which is what these videos, I'll let the videos speak to themselves. Like what they have basically proven is that they cannot prove anything. And that they are so, like science, like I always say to people, they say, "You trust the science." Well, I don't trust the science because the science is controlled by a few Farmageddon companies. Okay, they pay to have tests done that will prove their results. Or they don't even have any tests done. They just say they did. We don't know. We actually don't know. I mean, I often know because I go looking for those tests and I don't find them, or I find it a very fake test. It's like I use this example all the time. There used to be an advert on television, and I don't remember. I think it was Olay. I can't remember, for facial cream. And I've always studied language and writing and stuff like that, and psychology. So that's why I would say. So the advert basically said something like, 9 in 10 women found that, like in writing at the bottom, saw visibly improved skin or visible results. So I always remind people, if you take 9 people from the gutter, homeless people who live in a very hot, dry climate, or or in a very cold climate like Alaska, and they've never put anything on their faces, and you put even just what was it called? It's now outlawed, lanolin from an animal's product, which that's what they used to use on their skins to seal from the cold. If you put anything on their skins will be visibly improved. But if you take 10 people from Hollywood, they will already use moisturizer. It will have absolutely no effect whatsoever. So you have to look at the perspective. So science proves nothing. It just proves a point that somebody wants to make, which I can come along and disprove with the same things. And then people say, oh, well, you're just being argumentative. I said, yes, because it shows you that you can't actually prove anything. Now, I mean, there are observable things like gravity. So I mean, I don't have anything like it, but if I take something, and I drop it, it falls vertically. It's what we perceive as the ground. We can observe that. We cannot prove what causes it. But what would 8.9 billion out of, they would say it's all, but you'll probably find at least 50% would say it's nonsense. And that's the point. So you can so all of these tests that they run, all of these scientific tests, they very carefully choose, if you're trying to sell a particular product, that's why they run the tests, because they want to sell a product and they want to make it look like it's effective, especially when it comes to cosmetics and things like that. So they will go find a test subject that they will see improvements on. They won't go find, for example, let's say you use X, Y, and Z brand already. Okay, they don't use those tests those people to test a new product, because they will see no difference because they already use the old product. They will go find somebody who does not use that product at all to then reuse it. So those experiments, if you had to take a control group of people, let's say it's face cream, okay, and you take a test group of people who already used the old version and a test group of people who have never used it, you will see a much bigger improvement or change because they've never used those particular combination of chemicals or stuff on their face. The people who use the version 1, if they're all honest, they won't really see a difference. They will feel obliged to lie. They will convince themselves, oh, this is definitely better. So you get that human perspective. But measurable results you won't see. And that's what people just don't get. The advertising and product manufacturers and science is keen on selling products. You do not get a government grant. You do not get a research grant unless the person wants to sell a product. People have this fancy idea that we have all these just trillions of billionairesses, living in Adam's family like castles, and they just have more money than sense, and they are paying people to discover new secrets. No, that's patently untrue. You can't find these people anywhere, specifically in the modern world. We find are the few top pharmaceutical companies that pay, and they say, okay, right, we want to sell this product. They don't say it in that way, but you need to run experiments to prove this. So this is your grant. Run the experiments in such a way that it proves this. And then they say, oh, we ran experiments and it proved this. Of course, because you set the parameters up for it to be proven. Like with the cream. I like the cream because everybody can relate to that. Someone who never uses cream will see a huge improvement in their skin, especially if they're outdoors. However, somebody who really uses cream, you could be using, let's say, Pond's, and then you switch to L'Oreal or whatever. The effect's pretty much the same. You won't notice the difference. Anyway, let's carry on. Let me just post the link. That was that video. Any comments? What's the next one? Let me see. I'll have to look at my notes and copy the next one. Time does not exist. Explained with a graph. So these are getting interesting. Then we're getting into the general relativity theories and special relativity, and then a woman who believes we don't have free will stuff. So they all kind of roll into one to the other. They're relatively short. They're not very, very long. Right, so let's...
What is time? In this channel, we've talked a lot about time. As black holes warp space around them, we've learned that time slows down. We've discovered the time-influencing effects of gravity, and even how the James Webb Telescope can peer through time to the distant past by taking advantage of the fixed speed of light. All this makes sense so far, but what actually is time? You can't taste it, touch it, or feel it, yet time has an unstoppable influence on us and is pushing us forward whether we like it or not. Doesn't something that impacts everything we do deserve some additional understanding? I'm Alex McColgan and you're watching Astrum, and while this is an area that scientists have many theories about, I'd like to share with you today one model that might help you understand this mysterious concept that is ticking all around us. By the end of this video, we are going to have a possible explanation for why time slows down as velocity increases, and why shapes warp when undergoing velocities close to the speed of light. This video is a collaboration with my brother, based on recognized scientific theory, where we have taken scientific concepts and combined them into something you may not have seen before.
Concepts and theories. He doesn't say proven scientific shit. He just says theories and concepts.
But before we get to that, we have to begin with one foundational idea. Time is actually another dimension. Now, before you double check that you haven't logged into some sci-fi channel by mistake, let's discuss what I mean by dimensions. While in popular culture, different dimensions are often described as parallel worlds that are very similar to ours, yet subtly different, in this context, when we talk of different dimensions, we are referring to the dimensions of space, as in three-dimensional space, or 3D space, which may be far more familiar to you. This is by no means trivial though. 3D space is all around you. It is the around you, and is very relevant to our topic. Let's begin by making sure we understand the 3Ds, and the relationships between them before we add the fourth D.
I think most people don't even know what the 3D stands for. 3 dimensions, 4 dimensions, 2 dimensions. I think half the people are so used to the terms they don't even think about them anymore.
Broadly speaking, 3D or three-dimensional space simply refers to space that can be measured in 3 different perpendicular directions. The perpendicular nature of these dimensions is important, but we'll get to that later. 3-dimensional space is usually described as having height, width, and depth, and they all have 90-degree angles between them. Simply put, objects like us that exist in 3D space can move left and right, up and down, and forwards and backwards. We are comfortable with this kind of space. Using this as our basis, it becomes much easier to imagine what we mean by 2D space and even 1D space. To move from one space to another, all we need to do is remove or add an extra dimension of measurement or movement that must be a 90-degree angle from all previously existing angles. So, 2D objects move in a plane that's bounded by the X and Y directions, or the X and Z directions, or the Y and Z directions, but not all 3 at once. 1D objects can only move either along X or Y or Z. Imagine a person who lived in such a 1D world. Their whole existence would be found either moving one way or the other. All of reality would exist either to the left or to the right of them, and would appear as a singular dot. They could not move or see in any of the other directions, and probably could not even comprehend such directions as even existing. Photons whizzing by them would only be visible if they entered the singular line that was a 1D person's whole area of existence. Now, adding extra directions of movement is what's needed to move things up from 1D to 2D to 3D. So, in theory, we can predict what we need to do if we were to jump to 4D. However, here we hit a snag. While it's easy to draw a line that's perfectly perpendicular to a single other line, or to draw another line on top of those lines that is perpendicular to the 2 previous lines, how would we draw a 4th line that's perpendicular to all 3? Surely such a thing is impossible. Well, within 3D space, such a thing is impossible. The best we can do is draw approximations. For instance, it's possible to draw an approximation of a 3D shape on 2D paper by doing something like this. These lines are all 2-dimensional, but we look at this and our brain recognizes that this is a picture of a 3D shape. So in the same way, we could probably do something similar to what a 4D object might look like using just 3D lines. Mathematicians have attempted to do this, although their results tend to be a little confusing. Although this is mathematically sound as a basis for a 4D object, I personally don't find my understanding of 4D space deepened by looking at it, so I won't focus on it in this video. There is some evidence, however, that a fourth direction exists.
Oh, that's it. Where's my machine?
And we are moving along
my
it
machine
right
froze
now.
up.
That fourth direction, or dimension, is time. Einstein predicted this connection when he linked space and time into one unified space-time in his theories of relativity. According to him, time and space are two parts of the same thing. To me, this connects with 4D space very nicely. Just as there is no real difference between the Z and the X or Y directions, so too would there not be any difference between time and space if time is just another direction, albeit one that we can't see. And time is important. Without time, our 3D space wouldn't move. It would perpetually be in one state because it's time that allows us to move about in it. But why can't we see it? Why can't we look in the direction of time? To explain this, let's look at the difference between the different dimensional spaces. We best notice this when we consider what 2D objects might look like if they were to move around in 3D space. This is where we start to delve into the model. Let's begin by visualizing a standard 3D space. But because we want to eventually see all of space and time in one model, let's cheat a little. Let's compress all of 3D reality as we know it into a flat, two-dimensional place. In this plane, let's make that our XY plane, which we will label space, which frees up the Z dimension for time. In this model, all 3D people are now just 2D. A 2D person could exist and live their lives in the place marked space at the bottom of our chart. However, by moving them up on the chart at a constant rate, they are also moving through time. Let's for ease and convenience say that the top of our diagram is the future, while the bottom is the past. So the higher up our 2D person goes in this diagram, the older they get. As we don't seem to have a whole lot of control over our ability to travel through time, let's imagine for a second that our 2D person travels upwards at a constant rate, as if there is some consistent force or wind at play pushing them upwards towards the future. Sadly, we cannot slow down time for ourselves simply through willpower, no matter how much we might want to do so. However, it is misleading to say that we can't change it at all. The faster we travel in space, the slower we travel in time. This is one of the guiding principles of Einstein's relativity. This model can express this idea through the power of vectors. As our 2D person tries to move to their left or to their right, their vector of travel changes. While traveling at a fixed rate, like a sail on a ship catching a breeze, we can only go as fast as the wind takes us, so the vector coming out from their front must always remain the same. To travel the fastest through time, our 2D person must orient his vector completely in the future direction or upwards. However, if they are to travel any amount in either direction to their sides, they can only do so by pointing their vector away from their direction of travel. They have motion in the X direction now, but they have done so by reducing their motion in the Z direction. They are moving through space, but at the cost of moving a little slower through time. Taking this to its furthest extreme, our individual has completely flipped on their side and now only has motion in the direction of X and none in the direction of Z. They have velocity in space, but not time. So I suppose this implies our vector is the speed of causality, or the speed of light. If this is the speed we're talking about, then moving at low speeds through space would not have any noticeable difference in our speed through time. We'd have to go really fast before we started to notice anything. The vector still mostly points upwards. An interesting result of this model is that, from the 2D man's perspective, nothing has really changed. He has his own view of what reality is. For him, the vector coming out of his chest is still time. The dimensions of the plane he's lying flat on is his space. To him, it's the rest of the universe that's gone a little weird, but he himself is perfectly normal. However, once he reorients himself, it is clear that the rest of the universe has moved on without him. This is clearer if we add a second 2D person. Initially, both of our individuals do not move in space. All of their vector is pointing in the direction of time. Nothing that strange seems to happen so far. However, if our stickman on the right turns and vectors at near the speed of light for a bit, then reorients himself, while the second 2D man on the left just stays where he is, it becomes clear that our 2D men have not moved at the same rate through time. Assuming that our two stickmen can somehow still see each other, let's imagine that they somehow project an image of themselves onto the other person's space plane. They immediately notice that there is a difference in age. The one who traveled at the speed of light did not advance so quickly through time as the other, who remained stationary and so is younger. But why do we find this model so compelling? Well, it is because of what those projections would look like during changes in direction. From the point of view of the first stickman, initially the projection of their friend seems fairly normal. However, as they start traveling very quickly in space, and their vector oriented in a direction away from time, a 2D shape reveals its inherent flatness. And from a face-on perspective, it goes from this to this. The speedily traveling stickman appears to flatten, with an effect that's more pronounced the faster they go, and the flattening takes place in the direction of their travel. The stickman who remains stationary might wonder at the strange change that is occurring to their friend, never comprehending that it represents a reorientation of a 2D figure in 3D space. Now, what captures my imagination about this is that this same thing happens in real life. According to Einstein's theories of relativity, objects traveling at great speeds in 3D space would appear from an external observer to flatten in the direction of their travel. This squishing effect happens exactly in line with this model and is to do with time dilation. However, from the person who's traveling's perspective, they do not flatten, but it is the rest of the universe that warps. I talk about this in greater depth in another video of mine, where we can see the effects of spatial warping in a computer model. From their perspective, everything would stretch at the edges of their vision, while their destination would seem further away, which is again what this model would predict. The only difference is that in this model we're just exploring a 2D object stretching, so the stretch is only in one direction, while in real life it's 3D, which means it stretches in two directions instead. But that is what you might expect as you turn away from our conventional 3 dimensions and start orienting yourself away from time. But if this is correct, so what? Why does it matter? If time is truly a direction, then it deepens our understanding of the universe. It also raises more questions. What is the force that pushes us ever forward in time? Why does it seem that we can never move against it? Although in this model there is no reason why a vector could not point downwards, in real life that doesn't seem to ever happen. This model also answers the question of, if time is a direction, what is our shape in time? Does part of us protrude into the past or into the future? According to this model, that does not happen. We are flat pancakes in the 4th dimension, pennies that look round when you look at us head on, but revealing our thinness when we turn away from you. That's a strange thought, but it may just be true. This might explain why we are unable to see through time. We just don't extend enough in that direction for it to be visible. Your form might be quite different than you first thought. Of course, this model is just a theory of ours, although we have tried to base it on scientific observations and conventional theory. But what do you think? Does this model help you make sense of time as a 4th dimension? Please leave your ideas in the comments below on the nature of time and what it might actually be instead. I hope to explore more strange concepts like this in a new series called The Unseen World, where I want to explore the shape of reality around us. While it's normally invisible to us, the shape and dimensions of the universe can explain why things are the way they are, and I'm excited to explore it with you. If you are interested in it, let me know. I'm very pleased.
So, yeah. I chose these videos because they kind of popped up as I was searching for them. And I thought they really go well together, and it gives you like a progression of what I'm kind of was trying to show people. So I thought they actually really do a very good example of blowing your mind, because you're used to like a 3D world, but that is also a perception. So I think that I found them very interesting. Some of them I did watch, the shorter ones I did watch most of it, because I thought, well, okay, I'm definitely going to play this one. And then I just kind of arranged them in the order that, you know. And as the videos are playing, I am posting the links to them. So if you want to go over there and support them, click likes, whatever, you're more than welcome. Or just to watch more of their videos. And that will be with the VOD anyway. So, you know, you can always go back and if you forget to copy the link, whatever, you can get the link. So now we're going into special relativity. Let me just copy the other link now, because I'm going to forget and be pasting the wrong link. So now we're going into general relativity, and then special relativity, and then other videos on that, and kind of leading up to the last video, which we might watch all of it, and might not. That one's quite long, so we'll see how that goes. Anybody got any comments? Anybody want to say anything before we move on? All right. Now we're going to go on to general relativity. Again, it's largely science-based or opinions on science or scientific theories that could explain certain things. Just keep that in mind. It's not proof.
What is gravity? Two famous scientists did research on how gravity works. Newton was the foremost of them. What Newton is explaining about gravity is that all things in the universe have mass. There will always be an attraction between two objects, or every mass attracts every other mass. The gravitational force of an object also varies according to its mass. That is, an object with a greater mass pulls a lighter object to its side. The greater the distance between two masses, the less their gravitational force decreases. Force is inversely proportional to the distance to the power of 2. This means that if the distance increases by 2 times, the force will decrease by 4 times. If the distance increases by 3 times, the force decreases by 9 times. This is what Newton explained about gravity. Everything happens just as Newton said. The Earth orbits the Sun, the Moon orbits the Earth, and the universe itself works according to Newton's gravity. If the Sun's gravity is so strong, why didn't the Earth smash into it? Distance and angular momentum are relevant factors in this context. Well, everything's all right. This was accepted by everyone who was there then because it fits perfectly according to physics. But here comes the biggest confusion. The distance between the Sun and the Earth is about 150 million kilometers. Will there be a force for such a distance? For example, if I kick a ball, there is contact between me and the ball. So there is physical contact that makes the ball move. But what lies between the Sun and the Earth is the greatest distance. That being the case, scientists are gradually confused about what the kind of force that causes binding between such objects. And this is where Einstein joins. According to him, gravity is not a force, but it doesn't make sense. Why does it happen if there is no gravity? What's making it happen then? Which mysterious thing causes it? But his explanation for it, though not understood by anyone at the time, was understood a few years later. And it was that discovery that elevated him to an important scientist in the world. So, what was his discovery? Let's see how that works. Our universe looks like it is empty, but in reality it is not empty. Empty spaces are not really empty. The whole universe is like a fabric sheet. That sheet combined with fourth dimension time becomes space-time. He says curvatures in space-time are responsible for gravity. Let's take a fabric mat for example, and make a fat man sit in the middle of it, and make a skinny man sit in the edge of the mat. Now we will see that the mat bends inside where the fat man is, so the skinny man is automatically pulled towards the fat man. The fat man does not exert any force, and even if he doesn't touch him, the skinny man is drawn towards him. Similarly, gravity occurs for everything in the universe. As the sun bends space-time, the Earth is attracted towards it. It is not a force. As space bends, it has an impact on the objects on the curve. The mass tells space-time how to curve. Space-time tells the mass how to move. Now it's easy to explain how Einstein came to realize this. He found out the truth through thought experiments. Then the mathematical equations were also confirmed. He's sitting in his office one day when he sees a man cleaning the windows of a building close by. He starts to think about what would happen if that person fell down. While it may seem strange to us to hear this, Einstein describes it as the happiest thought in my life. Let's look at the things that crossed his mind. We will lock the man who was falling from the top of the building into an elevator. A man who is falling will not feel any force, since he is inside the elevator, and there is no reference point. He can't realize if he falls down or floats. The phenomenon of falling down as a free fall without any reference point is like floating in space. That is, according to physics, there is no difference between a person who falls from the top of a building and floats in space. Both of them wouldn't feel any gravitational force. So empty space weightlessness is equal to free fall on Earth. Let's move on to the next step. Now I'm floating in space inside the lift, and there's a ball also floating with me. A motor engine has been fit into the bottom of my lift, and I started that engine and accelerated the lift upwards at a speed of 9.8 per second square. 9.8 is 1g, the gravitational force for Earth. Now what happens when I accelerate at this speed is that the ball floating with me will fall down on the lift floor, and I will also be pushed towards the bottom of the lift. I feel the same amount of gravity on Earth as I feel inside the lift that is accelerating at a speed of 9.8 meters per second square in space. Whatever can be done with the help of gravity on Earth can also be done in this lift. I don't feel any difference, whether in space or on Earth. So free fall on Earth is equal to free movement in space. Gravity on Earth is equal to 9.8 meters per second square. Acceleration in space. That is, acceleration causes gravity. Now I'm in space inside a lift, and I turn off that engine, and the lift is made to float steadily in one place. What will happen if I throw the ball in straight? When I throw a ball, it goes in a straight line. What if I throw that ball at an accelerating lift? The ball will go down in a curved path and hit onto the floor. So far, everything is going well. Now I've switched from the ball to a light beam. How will it go if I torch the light in the accelerating lift? Light is known to always go in a straight line at constant velocity. If you throw a ball on the Earth, it will travel in a curved path and then fall to the ground. If the ball is thrown from an acceleration lift in space, it will also travel in a curved path. Does that mean light itself will be able to bend? Can light be bent even though it has no mass and always moves in a straight line? Einstein says it will bend. Yes, it is possible if there is something called space curvature, as he claims. How do we find it? The lift that is accelerating at just 9.8 meters per second square does not have enough opportunity to bend the light. So now, I change the acceleration speed from 9.8 to 98. According to Einstein's prediction, the bend of light in acceleration at 98 meters per second square is very small. That is, it bends only the size of an electron. This means that if we increase gravity or acceleration, light can bend more and more. Well, how do we prove this? In those days, it was impossible to build an engine that had such acceleration and implement it. In fact, not even a rocket was invented at the time, but we have gravity. The sun was the strongest gravity when it comes to our nearby things. Its gravity is 28 times stronger than Earth's because its mass is 330,000 times bigger. If we calculate what will happen in that gravity, the gravity will bend the light to 1.75 arc seconds. An arc second is 360 degrees in a circle, and if you take 1 degree of it, it has 60 minutes within it, and 60 seconds per minute. Of these, 1.75 arc seconds is very small. In 1915, Einstein published his theory with equations. Everyone was confused when they saw this theory. What is this? What is he trying to say? No one understood it at the time. Then 4 years later, Arthur Eddington, the greatest astronomer at the time from England, set out with his team to experiment with this. At that time, they knew the exact location of some of the stars, and if Einstein's theory was correct, the star behind the sun should be visible somewhere else, because the light should bend and be visible to our eyes. They were waiting for a total solar eclipse because the sun's brightness makes it hard to see nearby stars. When the day of the solar eclipse came, Arthur Eddington's team started taking pictures. To their surprise, the star showed up in the photos in a place they hadn't expected. Gravity had bent light itself because space-time had been bent. For example, I go straight from one place to the North Pole. As far as I'm concerned, I'm going in a straight line, but to an outside observer, I appear to be taking a curved path. Similarly, light always travels straight, and because its path is curved, it also bends. So the shortest path of light can be a curved one. Now you may have a doubt. If the space at the bottom of a massed object only bends, does space bend at the top of that object? All the space-time curvatures we see in the video are shown in 2D visuals, so that we can easily understand them. Its 3D form is hard to understand, but that's exactly the case. It was only after this space-time curvature was demonstrated that Einstein was celebrated as the greatest scientist. This thought experiment is not a simple one. It is the greatest thought in human history. This simply explained not only gravity, but also showed the world how the entire universe works. This is called the general theory of relativity. That's what space-time curvature is. But how did this time come in it? How does space-time explain time dilation? The special relativity theory provides an explanation, and we'll see it in detail in the next video.
Isn't that fascinating? So it's, it's what I like about, I suppose, our modern age is that, people make videos like this, and they kind of give you something to look at, to kind of understand. Like, I mean, I'm not a scientist, and I don't really have the brain for maths and that kind of thing. But I do like empiricism. I like things that make sense because of, and then it looks like at least it appears that it makes sense. I found these videos fascinating, and I like the progression of each one leading, on to the next one. So that's very interesting. And we only have our observations to if you're looking purely as a human, ego in the human body experiencing this life, we only have our observations of things, and that's not necessarily the truth. It's just our perception of it, which is, I suppose, largely what this discussion is about. Anybody's got any comments? Otherwise, I'll go on to the next ones by the same group. This Klonusk.
If you're trying to understand extremely tiny things that are smaller than atoms, the physics that comes into play is called quantum mechanics. If you're looking at a huge mass, the physics that comes to play then is called general relativity theory. If you're looking how the universe behaves at extreme speed, then it's special relativity theory. So speed is the fundamental core of special relativity theory. But what is speed? In everyday life, speed is nothing but distance divided by time. For example, if a car reaches a 100-kilometer distance in 1 hour, we can say that the car speed is 100 kilometers per hour. It looks simple, but speed has unusual features when it gets into very high numbers, especially its unusual effect on space and time. Speed is relative. It can vary one to another. This means that different frames of reference will get different speeds of the same moving object. But the speed of light is not like that. It travels at a constant speed, which means that the speed of light is the same for all observers, no matter the observer in motion. But why is the speed of light constant? Why is it always 300,000 kilometers per second? How did scientists figure out the speed of light? What is the great discovery Einstein uncovered with the help of knowing the exceptional feature of light? Why can't anything travel faster than light? Let's see. As a matter of effect, the study of light doesn't just arise during Maxwell and Einstein's time. The debate has been going on for about 2,300 years. As far back as the times of ancient Greece, the philosopher Aristotle said that light has no speed, that light was instantaneous. This claim lasted for more than 1,500 years, because measuring the speed of light is not trivial. Finding the speed of light is not as easy as finding the distance a man walks. Light travels so fast that there was no way to detect its speed at the time. In the 1600s, the famous scientist Galileo believed that light had a definite speed. He not only believed, but also tried to measure that speed. He and his assistant each took a shuttered lantern, and they stood on hilltops 1 mile apart. Galileo flashed his lantern, and the assistant was supposed to open his lantern shutter as soon as he saw Galileo's light. He tried to calculate how long it would take the light from his lantern to reach the assistant on another hilltop, but he could not. The reason is that a mile is too short a distance to calculate the speed of light. In fact, knowing the speed of light now, for light to reach 1 mile away, would take 0.000005 seconds, far too fast for human reflexes. Then in 1670, the Danish astronomer Ole Romer was studying the orbital path of Jupiter's moon, Io. After studying its motion for 2 years, he found something strange. Io takes 1.77 days to orbit once around Jupiter. The time it takes to make each orbit is always the same. But he discovered that the moon didn't always appear where it was supposed to be. At certain times of the year, it seemed to be slightly behind schedule. At other times, it was slightly ahead. Roma wondered why it would orbit more quickly sometimes and more slower at other times. Finally, he noticed that Io seemed to be ahead of its predicted orbit when the Earth was closer to Jupiter, and behind when it was further away. Perhaps if the speed of light were infinite, then Io would be visible to us on Earth at the same time its orbit. However, he found that the light from Io takes a few minutes to reach Earth, so light has a certain speed. He also found the speed of light using the locations of Earth and Jupiter, so he calculated the speed to be around 200,000 kilometers per second. Following this, in 1728, James Bradley, an English astronomer, found that Jupiter's distance was not far enough to calculate the speed of light, so he spent time observing a distant star. Observing this star, he found that its apparent position changed throughout the year. He calculated the speed of light to be 301,000 kilometers per second by investigating it through a stellar apparent method. It wasn't exactly the speed of light, but it was close. Although subsequent experiments were carried out by other scientists, an experiment in 1887 became the most famous. Sound needs a medium to travel through, such as air. Ocean waves are relative to the water. Similarly, Michelson and Marley conducted an experiment to prove that light needs a medium to travel. The experiment was conducted to prove that a substance called ether pervades the universe and acts as a medium for light. This experiment ended in failure, and it became clear that light does not need any medium to travel. It can travel through both medium and vacuum. The Nobel Prize was awarded for this discovery. At the end of their failed experiment, they calculated light speed to be 299,910 kilometers per second. This value was believed and remained in use for scientific calculations for some years. Then, at a turning point in the history of science, the speed of light was precisely calculated with mathematical equations by Scottish mathematician and scientist Maxwell. He was just thinking differently. Electromagnetic waves always travel at the same speed, no matter if they are longer or shorter waves. They always travel at a constant speed. With his equations, he found the speed of electromagnetic waves and velocity of light are exactly the same numbers, 300,000 kilometers per second. So he finally concluded that if the speed of electromagnetic disturbances is equal to the speed of light, then light itself must be an electromagnetic wave. Now, it's clear that light is an electromagnetic wave which travels at a constant velocity. But what is constant? Imagine a car X traveling at the speed of 20 kilometers per hour. A stationary person near the roadside now measures the car's speed, and he measures the value at exactly 20 kilometers per hour. Now, a car called Y comes from the opposite direction at the speed of 20 kilometers per hour. A person from car Y measures the speed of car X, and it shows 40 kilometers per hour. Velocity of car X plus velocity of car Y is equal to 40 kilometers per hour. Now take another car called car Z, which is moving away from car X at the speed of 10 kilometers per hour. If you measure the speed of car X from car Z, you will get the speed of car X as 10 kilometers per hour, because 20 kilometers per hour minus 10 kilometers per hour is equal to 10 kilometers per hour. How can the speed of the same moving object give different rates of speed for different observers? There's no need to wonder because speed is relative. But if you measure the speed of light, no matter how fast you move away from the light, or no matter how fast you move toward the light, it always shows the same speed, 300,000 kilometers per second. Let's put an example of you traveling on a bike at the speed of 10% of our speed of light, which is 30,000 kilometers per second. So the speed of light from your bike doesn't equal 330,000 kilometers per second. It remains 300,000 kilometers per second always. The speed of light is constant and doesn't depend on the speed of light source, but there is no explanation for why the value is constant. It's a fundamental law of nature. So, to maintain the constant velocity feature, space and time experience unusual features such as time dilation and length contraction. So in this universe, everything is relative except the speed of light. With the core idea of constant velocity of light, Einstein developed his special relative theory, which gave us a new way of understanding the nature of time. We already know only light itself can travel at maximum speed in our universe. Can anything travel faster than the speed of light? To get the answer for this, let's take a look at a relativistic mass equation. Relativistic mass is equal to rest mass divided by root of 1 minus v squared by c squared. Relativistic mass is nothing but how much mass increased when the object is in motion. Here, rest mass means original mass of an object. V means velocity of the motion object. C means velocity of the light. If an object moves 10% of the speed of light, for example, its mass will only be 0.5% more than normal. But if it moves 90% of the speed of light, its mass will double as an object approaches the speed of light. Its mass rises precipitously, and once it tries to reach the speed of light, its mass becomes infinite. If we look at Einstein's mass-energy equivalence equation with this infinite mass, the energy required to move this object also becomes infinite. Even our universe itself has finite energy. How can we get infinite energy to move the object? So this is the reason that any massed thing in this universe can't travel the speed of light. As we saw earlier, to maintain the constant nature of speed of light, time acts weirdly, and the end of the result causes time dilation. Einstein is the only man who discovered this feature of the universe, and he described this in his special relativity theory. Does this mean his theory tells us that time really slows down at an extreme speed? If it's true, light itself actually doesn't feel any time. Let's see these details in another video soon.
Now, I want to go back in this video, and then I'll just mute the sound. Actually, let me do that now. Oh, where's there? Let me see if I can find that part where there's little somewhere here. Where's those animations here? Okay, so perhaps this little stick figure, perhaps that is existence observing speed. Now, if you think of it from that point of view, that person's not moving. The person is okay. Now it's gone. Okay, so if you are in a perspective where you aren't moving, when you're looking at displacement, the displacement in space and time, I suppose, then if you're moving at the same speed, you don't perceive any speed. You don't perceive any like this whole thing with the elevator and through space and all of that. And I just like, because when you were talking about this, I'm going to pause that. Let's just pause that. So that woman, she's not moving. She's looking at things moving around her, but she's not moving. So everything is moving in relation to her. If she was on a conveyor belt, traveling at the same speed as the cars, they would stay with her. There would be no movement. She would look at other things that would be moving, flashing past her, and then perceive the movement with that. But if she was in an elevator, like the previous video, the walls stay constant. The walls don't move. The whole reality has moved with her, or him. In that case, it was a man. So this is why this is so important to understand the universe and time and movement. If you are in a virtual reality, you experience what is inside that virtual reality. So that's what I believe we are experiencing. We are in this simulation to experience things that are not possible just spirit, because spirit does not have these confinements. So this is why that book that I often speak about, that Barney's Guides said I should read, The Grieve No More Beloved, explains this, how we are in kind of a simulation, and we experience it even when we go into we don't go into the afterlife, but we cease to have a body and then we just exist in spirit. How often souls and things still recreate things that are familiar to them, even though the soul kind of knows that it is fakery, but they're still experiencing this stuff. So the experience for me is what creates what we perceive as factual. Of course, to me, that is the only true thing that we can honestly say. Yes, time is constantly relative. Movement isn't. meaning any kind of movement of time. Well, but that's what these experiments have come to teach us, is that we expect time and movement to be predictable, but as seen by calculations, planets are not where they're supposed to be. Curvature, like there's another video which would again explains this. I think it's the next one. Explains this thing further, except it's inside a train. So, well, it depends. If you're not moving, does time still move? Is time moving, or are we just perceiving it? So if you have to actually define the premise for time. So if we define the premise for time as being on a human level, then clearly we are born, pop out of the womb, and there you are, screaming like a nutcase. And then at some point you just kick the bucket and you're dead. So that is our timeline. It's on our tombstones. It says, for me, it'll say, I don't know when I'm going to die, but what's for 49 years from now? 2000 and, I don't know, 70. No, it's 69. 2074. That's when I expect to die. So it will say, born 1969 to da-da-da-da. So that's our perception of that block of time. But to the soul hasn't died. So that's the thing. We got to define whether we're talking about a spiritual truth or a scientific proof. Truth. But everything is in motion, because everything is a wave, and a wave can only exist in motion. So that's why electricity, everything is constantly in motion. For example, even water, if water stands still, it becomes stagnant. It has to have motion. Everything has to have motion or it stagnates. It's just the nature. And even things that appear to be still has movement. Even water in stagnation has a different type of movement that creates an environment for algae, bacteria, all sorts of stuff that then bloom. They call it blooming. They bloom in the water because the water is not moving as quickly, but the water is still moving. It's impossible for water not to move. There's always vibrations. There's always sound that causes the water to move. So there is always movement. So time and movement is in relation. That's why it's called relative, the relative theory, because it's relative to your position in the 3D matrix, how you're perceiving. If you were in my car in those days, like in the middle of nowhere, when I hit 260 kilometers an hour inside the car, and it was a very nice car. You didn't feel anything. You could see like things flashing past you at a very rapid rate. Yeah. Then you go, oh, wow, we're going really quickly, But inside the car, you weren't moving. Until, of course, if you hit something, then you suddenly realize very quickly that you were moving. So this is the thing. And this is the reason why I like these videos, is because it illustrates what I keep saying. This is our perception of things. So we cannot say on a human level, we cannot say this is true. We can only say it's true if we lay down the premise. On a spiritual level, like Barney and I will be the first to say these things, there are certain truths that are just true. We don't have to like them. I don't like all of them. It's a human. It's like, oh, fuck, I don't like that. But it's just the way it is. And I know it is because, being connected to the soul, to the universe, to my universe, I then realize, okay, that's true. That's just a true. I can't prove it on a human level, but that is what it is. I can't explain it, but it is what it is. And that to me is the truth. And of course, most humans will argue and say, that's just your impression of the truth. I said, no, because I didn't. It's not like I sat and daydreamed. Like if I was doing that, I'd write a book. I'd create something 3D. I'd create something. This is not stuff that I've created. I mean, we can say I've created my own reality, but that's not because I've created differently. A final way I can say it is that time moves at the speed of time. Time moves at the speed of time. Light moves at the speed of light. Body moves at various speeds. Yes. And then perceives the speed relative. Like, for example, like now, okay, I have my camera set to a certain light, to 49 Kelvin. I have my light set to 49 Kelvin. The only thing that is changing, which you will see, what's the time now? It's 20 to 4. In about an hour or two, I will start getting darker because everything is fixed. But I have light coming in from there. Let's see. I don't know if you can see. What's red? Oh, those are the curtains. Those are horrible curtains. But like you see, okay, so you can't see because it's so bright. And I have something in front of my microphone. So over there's light coming in. That is sunlight. That's also one of the reasons why I have my lights and everything set to sunlight, to 49K, which is as neutral a light as you can get. So everything hopefully looks fairly good. When that light then starts to fade, the color stays more or less the same, but it starts to get darker. So that's the experience of the light changing. But if I was like, if I was in a light-proof room and I had these lights, nothing would change. You would not see any movement of light because light would be stationary. It would be evenly lit. McCready. Barney, what kind of drugs do you use? I want to know for my friends. The drugs of the conceptual mind, meaning I'm stone cold sober. Sober is coke, right? McCready loves to stir things up. So it all comes down to how you perceive things. And you can just simply say, okay, I want to perceive things in a certain way. So on this, think of you being the coder of the game. If we look at life, we don't look at life that way, then obviously all this doesn't make any sense. If you look at it from a fatalistic point of view, there's a couple of videos on that. We'll get into that. But if we take the premise that this is a simulation, and then it has a beginning and an end, then you are also the coder of that game. So if you decide, it's like a game that has multiple paths that you can take, and you cannot take both, for example. So you have to go, take this branch, then you experience the game differently. Then that becomes your truth. This is what people call your truth. It's not actually the truth, it's your experience. And I think that's very, very important that people do not actually get to understand. They live this weird existence where, this is another one, special relativity, which explains things, some same concepts, but with different models. All right, so the discussion is centered around mind-altering experiences. So,
okay, so let's talk about the physics of dead grandmothers.
This was quite interesting. I don't agree with everything.
I was sitting in a taxi together with a young man, and when I told him I am a physicist, he said, "Oh, can I ask you a question about quantum mechanics?" And so I thought, well, okay, go ahead. And he said, a shaman told me that my grandmother is still alive because of quantum mechanics. Is this right? I had to pause for a moment and try to understand, and after thinking about this for a while, I came to the conclusion it's not entirely wrong. But the thing is, it's got nothing to do with quantum mechanics. It's actually got something to do with Einstein's theory of special relativity. It's all about the reality of time. It's all about the question whether the present moment, this now which we experience ourselves, whether this is of fundamental importance. There are a lot of things, like those big existential questions about afterlife, that physics can actually tell us something about. My name is Sabine Hossenfelder. I'm a physicist and research fellow at the Frankfurt Institute for Advanced Studies. And I have a book that's called Existential Physics, A Scientist's Guide to Life's Biggest Questions. Before Einstein, time was this universal parameter. We all shared the same moment of time. the same moment of now that we could all agree on. But then Einstein came and he said, well, it's not that simple. And the major reason for this is that the speed of light is finite and nothing can go faster than the speed of light. It's the same for all observers. And this sounds like a really innocent assumption, but it has a truly fundamental consequence, which is fairly easy to understand actually. If you ask yourself whether you know if the screen in front of you is actually there right now. Naively, we would say, yes, of course, it's there. I mean, I'm holding it in my hand or I see it directly in front of me. But we just learned that the speed of light is finite and nothing can go faster than the speed of light. So everything that you experience, everything that you see it as it was a tiny little amount of time in the past. So how do you know that anything exists right now? What do you even mean by now? So this is the problem that comes up in Einstein's theory of special relativity. And Einstein tried to construct a notion of now in this new theory, and he failed. So imagine you're looking straight ahead and there's a train going through to your line of sight, say from the left to the right. And on the train there's your friend, and let's call her Alice. Now, let's also imagine that at the exact moment that Alice, who's standing in the middle of the train, is looking straight at you, there are light flashes going off on both ends of the train. And the question is, did these light flashes happen at the same time? Now, if you want to answer this question looking at the train, that's pretty straightforward. There are those light flashes going off. They both come from sources that are the same distance from you. So of course you see them at the same time. But how does the same thing look from Alice's perspective? The light flashes go off, but while the light travels towards her, she's moving towards one of the light sources and away from the other. So the one path of the light is shorter and the other one is longer. So from Alice's perspective, the light flash from the front of the train arrives earlier than the one from the back. So she would say, no, they did not happen at the same time. And now the important point is that this is relativity. Neither of them is right and neither of them is wrong. They both have an equally valid perspective. And what do we conclude from this? Well, we conclude from this that there is no unambiguous notion to define what happens now. It depends on the observer. So they're both right. And if you follow this logic to its conclusion, then the outcome is that every moment could be now for someone. And that includes all moments in your past, and it also includes all moments in your future. So this impossibility to define one notion of now that we all agree on is called the relativity of simultaneity. And it's super important because it tells us that fundamentally this experience of now that we all share is meaningless. So the mathematical framework that Einstein came up with to make sense of this absence of now and the finiteness of the speed of light and the relativity of simultaneity is that he combined space with time to one common entity, which is called space-time. And more specifically, because the present moment has no fundamental significance, this entire space-time exists in the present moment, and it's become known as the block universe. In the block universe, the past, the present, and the future exist in the same way. There's just no way that you can single out one particular time as special. So the past in which your grandma is still alive exists the same way as this present moment. Now, there's another way to look at this idea that people who have sadly deceased do in some sense still exist. And it's because of the way that all the fundamental laws of nature that we know work. They don't destroy information. The only thing that they do is that they rearrange the meta.
Everyone, newsflash. Jeffrey the Seer is here, and he totally sees everything.
Hey, Jeffrey. I think it's going to give you a shout out, so let's let it run or not.
Just give you the rules for how to put them in different places with different velocities. But you can apply those rules forward and backward. And this means if you had a really, really good computer, you can, in principle, always find out what happened earlier. So in this sense, information cannot get destroyed. It can, however, become, for practical purposes, impossible to retrieve. There are two cases that physicists have considered where information might get destroyed that have so far not been resolved. One of them is the information that falls into a black hole. We don't actually know what happens with it. And the other one is the mysterious measurement process in quantum mechanics, which is also an unresolved problem. So if someone you knew dies, then of course we all know that you can no longer communicate with this person. And that's because the information that made up their personality, it disperses into very subtle correlations in the remains of their body, which become entangled with all the particles around them. And slowly, slowly they spread into radiation that disperses throughout the solar system and eventually throughout the entire universe. But this is a very anthropomorphic thing. It's very tied to our own existence. And who knows what's going to happen in 1 billion years or something to the nature of humans. Maybe there'll be some cosmic consciousnesses which will also be spread out, and this information will become accessible
when you
again.
are in a relationship with
So I
a
know
person
it sounds
and you are not meeting their emotional, their sexual, and their intellectual needs, why should they stay? Why should they stay? What is the benefit of staying at that point?
crazy, but for all we know about the fundamental laws of nature, about Einstein's theories, and about the way that our current theories work, it seems that our existence actually transcends the passage of time. There is something timeless about the information that makes up us and everything else in the universe. And I think that's a really deep spiritual insight that we get directly from studying the foundations of physics. And I have to admit that I personally find it really hard to make intuitive sense of it. It's one way to look at the maths and say, okay, this is how it works. These are the conclusions that we draw from our observations, and the mathematics describes it correctly. It's another thing entirely to make sense of this in your everyday life. But as a physicist, I trust the process of knowledge discovery that comes from using the scientific method, and so I take this seriously.
Get smarter?
Right. I was just saying, don't use that shout out. I've actually just turned it off now because it just interrupts the videos every time we do a shout out. That's why I use the normal shout out. I've just actually, I got to remember to turn off the overlay so it doesn't. Yeah, the next video is also by her, how she says that we don't have choice, free will, which is quite interesting. I found her opinion interesting. Purely from her theory, it's true. It is true, but it's still interesting nevertheless. There's only 2 more videos. There's one more of hers, and then there's a long one, which if we're not chatting, we can kind of watch. That one is about is time travel possible in the universe, but it is quite long. But I found out that I actually do want to watch it. So let me just post the link. Make sure I got the right one. The link, that was this video.
With videos from
Why are you doing that? So that's this current one. Let me just copy the next link so I don't forget and paste the wrong one. So anyway, the series of videos. Eventually, I will make this into a into one highlight, the main parts, which is why I like to keep on topic while at least the main body of the video is running, because then I also put it on YouTube, and if it's full of interruptions, then it doesn't flow very well. So I find it very interesting. I actually do want to watch some more of the videos, purely from the scientific point of view. Most of the videos we played today are all about the theory of relativity, special relativity. It's all about science, because people always say, well, science proves everything. So these videos are kind of leading up to a point. Right. So any questions so far? We didn't discuss anything? Mostly these videos, like I've said before, are about actually making people realize that what we think is fact and is true and isn't true doesn't actually, is not actually true in the sense that people believe it is. Right, so I'm going to play the next one.
The future is determined by the past, except for random quantum jumps, which no one can control. Causes have causes, and they go back all the way to the Big Bang. Does that mean we have no free will? People often ask me that. I find the question stunningly uninteresting. Of course we don't have free will. Okay, then how do we make decisions? Do we make decisions? Did the Big Bang make me do this video? That's what we'll talk about today.
Don't necessarily agree, but she's got some very good points.
I already made a video about free will a few years ago, but I've noticed recently that a lot of people think free will is relevant for addressing climate change. And because I don't believe in free will, I've suddenly become a problem. This is complete nonsense. But let's start at the beginning. And we begin, of course, with physics. Everything in the universe is made of 25 particles that, for all we currently know, are not themselves made of any smaller constituents. We collect them in what's called the standard model of particle physics. That's everything in the universe except possibly dark matter, but that's a different story. Most of those particles are unstable and decay very quickly. How can it be that a particle which isn't made of anything can decay? That's a question I get so frequently, I made a video about that specifically. For now, let's stick with the particles that are stable. Those are the ones that we are made of. Electrons, up and down quarks, and photons and gluons to hold them together. And good thing they're stable, because otherwise you'd be more radiant than a nuclear fuel rod. You'd also be dead very quickly. Okay, so humans are one big collection of particles. What the particles do is described by the mathematics of the standard model. It's a lot of maths, and you need that maths if you want to answer difficult questions, like what's going on in LHC collisions. For simple questions, like whether free will exists, we don't need to know much about the maths. Relevant is just that ultimately what you and I do is also described by the standard model. And yes, that means that we know the equations for human behavior. We can write them down. In practice, that's a completely useless statement, because we can't solve the equations for all these 10 to the 30 or so particles that humans are made of. Not even the biggest supercomputer in the world could do that. But we don't need to solve the equations to draw conclusions from their properties. For the purposes of this video, the most relevant property of these equations is that they are deterministic, which means that if you know the properties and motions of the particles at one time, you can calculate what happens at any later time. Okay, it isn't quite as simple, because this is quantum physics. So on top of this deterministic behavior, there's an occasional quantum jump, which happens randomly whenever you make a measurement. You all know that I don't believe this stuff with the quantum jumps, but today I'll stick with the most generally accepted theory. So we have particles that behave deterministically, plus random jumps. In quantum mechanics, we use wave functions to describe the particles, and this implies that there are some quantities, like position and momentum, whose values you can't know precisely at the same time. But the wave function still changes deterministically. If you want, you can include gravity, but that's just a deterministic theory, a non-quantum theory or a classical theory, as physicists say. So gravity just adds some more determinism on top. And that's how the universe works, for all we currently know. It's one big wave function that contains all those particles. Its change in time is deterministic, with the occasional random jump. The deterministic part is fixed by the past. The random jumps cannot be influenced by anything, because that's what it means for them to be random. And that's it. Please don't blame me for this. I swear it wasn't my idea. Physics is great, but it doesn't tell you much about human anatomy, other than possibly that flapping your arms won't make you fly. That's because if you combine many particles, then things get very complicated very quickly. You get new emergent behavior, as it's often called. You don't even need to look at difficult things like human beings to see that. If you do as much as combine atoms to big chunks called metals, you get new behavior, like the ability to conduct electricity, or being very shiny, or being very painful if they fall on your foot. Emergent properties don't exist on the level of constituents. They arise from the properties and interactions of the constituents. A single electron doesn't have a conductivity. That just doesn't make sense. Conductivity is a property that only makes sense for large collections of electrons. It doesn't make sense to talk about the conductivity of an electron for the same reason it doesn't make sense to ask whether a single oxygen atom is a gas, or what's the marital status of your small intestine. It's what philosophers call a category error. It'd be trying to assign a property to a class to which it doesn't belong. Emergent properties don't make sense on the underlying levels, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. Chairs exist, all right, but they exist on the macroscopic level and not on the level of elementary particles. Curiously enough, our universe is organized so that the details of what happens at short distances become less important at large distances. This is why, if you want to understand planetary motion, you don't need to know the population of New York City. This is why, if you want to understand chemical reactions, you don't need to know the standard model of particle physics. And this is why, if you want to become a YouTuber, you don't need to know anything. Physicists call it the decoupling of scales, the mysterious but empirically well-confirmed fact that the details of what goes on at small scales can be disregarded if you're only interested in what happens on large scales. And this is why we have so many disciplines of science, because each discipline of science has its own language about emergent properties that are adequate to its subject. But that we get new emergent properties from the interactions of the constituents doesn't mean the equations that determine the behavior of the constituents do no longer apply. Emergent behavior is a consequence of combining large numbers of particles.
Someone
with
totally said a naughty word.
interactions.
I like it.
This video is actually quite dull. There was a part, and I don't know if it was in this video, that I really wanted people to watch. There was a part, and I don't. Maybe it's in the next video. Yeah, this one actually gets fairly dull. This is more technical. I actually thought it was this video where they explain, and I think it's possibly in the next video. So I'm not going to play the rest of this video because it's even starting to bore me. The beginning was just kind of the theory, but at one point I thought it was this video where she explains the loop of going back. I think it's the next video. Anyway, that was the point that I wanted to get with this. So yeah, we won't watch the rest of this. Let's just address something quickly because I don't really like hecklers. If you don't agree, it's okay. It's okay not to agree. But please don't go on and on and on and on and on and on. You know, I'm trying to put my opinion across. It's okay if you don't agree. But personally, I don't think drugs are the way to understanding. And people who do, I think, have missed a lot of the whole point of spirituality. So I think I actually do believe it's this video, but this video is quite long, so we don't have to watch the whole thing. Yes, And I think it's in this video, and I might be speaking a little bit before that, and this is why I thought it was in her video, but apparently it's not. I'm not going to watch that whole thing of the whole scientific thing, because that kind of defeats what I was trying to get across. But there was the loop, and I think it's in this video, and I think it might be at the beginning. So we'll and so. I don't want to get into a nasty discussion here, because, like I said, I would like to clip this for other people to watch this. So I don't want people. If you don't want to watch it, it's okay, but please don't carry on. Just see what this is. I think it's in this one.
It's a cold, moonless night with a mist that hangs heavy in the air.
Yeah, it's this one, and this kind of goes on what she was saying at the beginning of the video.
Yeah. As you turn to cross the road, fog swallows both the sound and headlights of the oncoming car. You see it too late and brace yourself for impact. Then, out of nowhere, an elderly stranger shoves you out of harm's way, is hit by the car, and ends up in a heap on the tarmac. Their life ends, as yours is saved. Later, a police officer hands you an envelope found in the pocket of the deceased. It is addressed to you. You open this envelope and find a note with 2 words scribbled on it. It simply reads, "Study physics." Whoever wrote this note saved your life at the expense of theirs, so it only seems fair you follow their advice. Decades later, you become a much celebrated physics professor. Your specialist subject, Albert Einstein's theories of relativity. You've always had a hunch that time travel is possible, and one day, finally, you crack it, and the world's very first time machine is sat, buzzing before you. Only then does the penny drop. How had you never realized before? You now have the power to go anywhere and any when, but you know exactly what you have to do. You take the letter you've kept all these years out of its frame on the wall, place it back inside its original envelope, and put the envelope in your pocket. Stepping into your time machine, you set the controls to take you back to a cold, moonless, misty night, arriving just in time to push your younger self out of the path of the onrushing car. You die on the roadside. It seems simple enough, but the real joy of time travel stories like this one comes once you begin to scratch beneath the surface, and some incredibly profound questions begin to emerge. First of all, who wrote the letter? The older version of you simply takes the letter they'd already been given as a teenager back in time. The letter is a seemingly creatorless entity stuck in a time loop. This is the bootstrap paradox. Secondly, do these time loops keep on repeating? You save your teenage self, so they grow up to travel back in time to save their teenage self, who grows up to travel back in time, and so on. You are stuck in a relentless cycle of living and dying. But the letter isn't. Does it just keep getting older and more worn and tattered? This is the restoration paradox. And whose idea was it to study physics anyway? The notion seems to appear out of nowhere, a thought with no origin. This is the ex nihilo paradox. And if events like this can actually happen, then it also appears you have no free will, no choices in life. You were always going to invent the time machine and had absolutely no option to do otherwise. It had to happen, had always happened. If you don't invent a time machine, then you can't save your teenage self, and you yourself would therefore die as a teenager. There is something in your future that's firmly fixed. This is the predestination paradox. And finally, what if you change your mind? Unfortunately, for your older self, this is not an option. You can't get cold feet when you arrive and let the younger you get hit by the car. How could you be there to have second thoughts in the first place? This is the auto-infanticide paradox. It is impossible to kill a younger version of you, even through the act of not doing something. And so, not quite such a simple story. Welcome to the weird and wonderful world of time travel. But of course,
So that's interesting. That's why now I remembered why I had not intended to play the entire previous video, but just because one leads on to the other. So I particularly like the beginning of this one. We can watch a little bit more if there's no discussion, but that's one school of thought, is that fatalism. So that it doesn't matter what you do, where you go, it always turns out the same. Now I don't believe in that because I see no evidence of that. Well, I really do see the evidence kind of the opposite when we look at the multitude of variables that can happen. This is what I call a Hollywood theory, where it's just theory. It exists in a vacuum because the only way these theories they're just interesting. They're very interesting to discuss and to sort of, get into your brain, and because it warps, well, it doesn't warp, but it expands your understanding of time and existence in the universe. And that's why I love these videos and I wanted to play them for you. It's not because I agree with them or don't agree with them. It's just because they expand the way we perceive things and the way we look at things, like this example of going backwards in time. This also indicates that, to me, what I always say, that time is not linear, and it all exists at the same time. It's just that in this limited perspective, this limited experience, we are experiencing it in a linear fashion. The soul is experiencing, it is not experiencing it in a linear fashion. It is experiencing the linear fashion of our experience because of the unpredictability. And this is why I don't believe these theories are correct. So the soul sets a part of itself free, well, not free, I suppose, in the way it's trapped in the body, because it's unpredictable. So it's also influenced by the people we come in contact with, events that happen during the day, during the week, during the year, during the lifetime, and it creates an unpredictability that the soul craves. Because in spiritual matrix, it can be whatever you want it to be within the framework of that matrix. You don't just suddenly become a completely different, the fish can swim wherever it likes in the ocean, but it's still the ocean, So I like these series purely because it just expands our understanding of what it is into an expansive idea of the universe, not just this, backwards and forwards and, hamster wheel type of existence. Right, so I'll play a little bit more of it. If anybody wants to discuss as well, that is the multiverse paradox. Well, that's a theory that there is more than one universe. But there isn't more than one universe. There is one universe that is not fixed by time. So every possibility exists. This is why then it goes off into quantum type of stuff. Every possibility exists at the same time. So for all we know, I am having this experience in the same body, but I'm playing multiple variations of it. The soul's playing multiple variations of it and seeing just different variations of it, of the same sort of similar lifetime, where I'm born to the same people, but between life and death, there's different variables. Okay, so I believe that's what people call the multiverse, but it's not really a multiverse. It's very difficult to explain in human terms. It's just anything is possible, and we can, the soul can experience different things, but the soul likes the unpredictability of this being in this physical form, because it creates a lot of unpredictability, variables, thunderstorms, monsoons, just stuff that happens that gives you an experience that is not necessarily predicted. Which is why I don't believe in fatalism and that everything's on a fixed timeline, because there's too many variables for that to be true within the realms of this existence, at least.
Traveling freely through time is impossible, you might say. You can't simply visit yesterday or rush headlong through millennia. And yet, this too is not quite so straightforward. Despite its myriad impracticalities, there are slivers of possibility lurking at the edge of physics, temporal loopholes lying just out of reach. And so, the question arises, if time travel were to be possible, just how could we do it?
The entire history, unadulterated.
In 2021, a researcher at Portsmouth University calculated that there are about 6 times 10 to the power of 80 bits of information in the observable universe. That's a 6 followed by 80 zeros. Information is incredibly valuable, and data brokers are collecting yours all the time. And that is where Incogni comes in, our sponsor today. They reach out to data brokers and help take your data downstream from...
Hold on. Where does that end?
Beats down as the distinctive whooping barks of howler monkeys echo around the humid swamps. The current in the muddy, winding river is so strong that you don't even have to paddle your canoe. You just sit back and take in the sights and sounds as you're carried along. Jack Finney, arguably one of the finest proponents of time travel fiction, compared our experience of time to a river like this one. It seems like we're relentlessly ferried downstream from the past to the future. We have no need to propel ourselves, but slowing down, speeding up, or turning around and heading back upstream doesn't seem possible either. But what happens to the parts of the river that we've left behind? Or in other words, where does yesterday go? It certainly seems as if it just disappears. Yet making the same argument about an actual river would seem ludicrous. You're unlikely to accept that the riverbed is torn up and mysteriously vanishes just because you've disappeared around the next bend. The upstream parts of the river are still there, even if you aren't. In the same way, it seems as if tomorrow isn't real until it is, that somehow it magically appears once the curtain falls on today. But that would be like new water springing up to make the river of time longer only once you approach. Where would it come from? And so, over the years, scientists have revealed that time really is like that river, with its length already laid out in its entirety, from its source high in the foothills of the Big Bang to its estuary at the universe's eventual demise. The past, present, and future existing alongside one another.
Now that part of it I agree, but the whole Big Bang Theory just is a little bit nonsense, because it is saying, as soon as we have a linear concept of things, okay, then there has to be a beginning. Now, so because no one knows what it is, least of all most scientists, they say there was just this Big Bang. I've watched some of the videos. I didn't bring them here to watch today because we're not really talking about the Big Bang. But the generally is that like there was nothing, then there was the Big Bang, and then there was something. But what was before there was nothing? Well, there was nothing. Okay, so how long did nothing happen for? How long was it? Because we're looking at a linear thing. So at some point there was nothing. So at that point, how long did that point last? Was it an instant? Was it a lifetime? Was it an eternity? Or are we now in a new eternity? But none of that's explained. They just say there's a Big Bang, the universe expanded, one particle, I think it's actually in this video, I think it has some of that information. And then it multiplied, I don't know how many times per second, and poof, it was there. Yeah, that's a very, very silly way of putting it, because it doesn't explain anything. That's just, it's what they call an opinion. It's called a theory. But it's not based on anything scientific per se, because we've never experienced this. We have no way of measuring something like this, and we simply don't know that this is true. It's just that people just believe it. Many theories. But the point is, if the premise is that time is linear, and the Big Bang happened, and then we had whatever, that we are saying there was nothing, and we do not know how long for there was nothing, and then suddenly there was a catalyst which marks the beginning of time. And poof, there was something, which is what we know now. And then poof, it'll go again and it'll go away. But what happens in between those two poofs? What happens between those two timeline points? Because we are looking like, then he goes on here now saying that everything exists at the same time. So what was before and what is afterwards? Oh, we don't know. Okay, so then how would you know that there's a beginning and an end? And this is why I would say our idea of time is just simply a perspective of events, not actual reality. It can't be infinite nothingness before, because if it was, this is the whole point. Thank you, Bonnie. That's my point. Is that if there was an infinite nothingness, infinite is infinite. It is forever. So it has, for the theory of the Big Bang to exist, it has to be finite. So that also means, so we either have one big infinity and then this Big Bang happened within that infinity. That is an acceptable thing. That makes sense on a spiritual level, is that, you see, what they're explaining with the Big Bang is our experience as a human being. Now that, you see, now when you turn the tables into a spiritual sense, that's what this, even though we're looking at a lot of science, I'm trying to see show people how it compares to the spiritual element. So at some point, this earth had to be created. Okay, whether it was Big Bang, small bang, no bang, bang bang, thank you, ma'am. This realm, this dimension, this physicality had to start. Okay, so and now this is why people go on about reptiles, and McCready eventually just takes it too far. And being human, not being the soul has no genes. Okay, so this is where I believe they got the Big Bang Theory from, is that they created this school, what I call the school of learning. Okay, so the souls are here to learn, to evolve, to experience stuff. And that's the Big Bang. However, it's like an episode within a bigger series. So the infinite, if you look at it that way, the infinite is the series. The Big Bang, our existence, is one episode in that total infinite experience. Then we explain the Big Bang. Okay, but scientists just they don't understand what it means. So they say there was nothing, then there was something, and then poof, there'll be nothing again. But that's illogical. That's illogical by science. Science itself is illogical because of the law, which is one of the truest laws that science so far still abides by, is that energy cannot be created and cannot be destroyed or cease to exist. It simply transmutes. It simply changes, and it changes its state. Like it takes a power station to charge up your phone. Then your phone gradually uses the energy, and it's released largely through heat, and it goes back into the universe. So the energies are always recycled. That's how you explain infinite nothingness or infinite conceptualization, if it is multidimensional in the sense of Big Bang created only our relative dimension. Yes, Bonnie, that's the way I say. That's the way I see it. That's what I say, is that, but this is a perception of what they call the Big Bang. It's Mother Earth. It's our planet. So when people start talking, warm, I also, if this is a simulation, which I tend to believe it is, not a simulation as in, a fake AF, by having VR goggles on. It's far more advanced than that. This is an actual experience that we are having. Otherwise, we would see right through it. Some of us do tend to see through you are awake in the dream. So you're still able to experience it, but you're awake in your dream. It's a leak or a construct. It's a construct. I wouldn't say it's a leak, but I would say it is a construct. So for us to go into the realm of saying that there are aliens amongst us, of course there are aliens amongst us, because no one has genetics on a soul level. So at some point there was another Big Bang, and we were then lizard people, or whatever the hell people remember. Okay, the soul will remember those experiences, will remember those Big Bangs. It will remember those planets. This is why we have all these series about Andromeda and this, and by and large, we can't find them. We can't go there. We can't prove they exist because there are memories we have. It's not to say they didn't exist. They may not exist in this reality because those simulations have ceased. Dave, okay, we've done this. Right, I'm bored of this game. EA, give us another one. And then they program another one, and we all agree, and we all come back, and we start a new experience. Okay, and that's what the Big Bang is. That's what all of these Big Bangs are. I just noticed your closed captions are predicting. Are they? I think it's just because the closed captions are going out when it's live for me, and then you guys get it. Maybe you're getting it a fraction, like kind of before the video is actually going live, because maybe you are lagging slightly, like a couple of seconds or something. And that was these are the theories. This is why I wanted people to watch them. These theories about the light being bent, like the perception, the depth perception of where things are in space, is a perception. If you stand, so like there's a lot of philosophies. I don't know philosophies that well, but I call them philosophies because not really religion, Taoism, and all of that, where most of the teachers say, if you want to understand the universe, stop. Sit still. That's what meditation is for. Sit still and just observe a flower, observe a bee, observe the universe. See through it, see it, experience it. Okay? But for the most part, people are either trying to hammer home their points in the spiritual basis because they had an LSD trip and they believe that this is this, and then, or they are scientists and they're trying to prove. Stop trying to prove stuff. Just simply expand your universe to know this is an experience. Experience it for what it is. Whether it's real or not, it's still an experience.
Great-great-great-grandchildren every bit as real as you are now. Your great-great-great-grandparents still alive and well, frolicking in the swells upstream in the vast river of time. Philosophers know this idea as eternalism. It's the opposite of presentism, which argues that only now exists and that the past is gone and the future yet to emerge. Debates between eternalist and presentist philosophers have raged since the days of ancient Greece. Indeed, the 4th century philosopher St. Augustine compared the present to a knife's edge, straddling the perceived past and an imagined future. But to a physicist, eternalism is known as the block universe theory, and is based on Albert Einstein's much-lauded general relativity, one of the most successful theories in the history of science.
Modern history of science.
In 1905, Einstein publishes the special theory of relativity. It does away with Isaac Newton's notion of absolute time. There is no universal clock that everyone can use to agree on when something happens. Instead, as the name suggests, time is relative. Depending on how they move through space, one observer could see event A happen before event B, while another sees event B occur before event A. Both observers are equally correct. An event in your past could be in someone else's future. This is yet another reason why all our yesterdays cannot simply vanish. How can they, when the events they contain might form part of somebody else's tomorrows? As well as this, special relativity cemented the fact that space and time are not completely distinct from one another. In 1908, Hermann Minkowski develops Einstein's work and properly unites space and time once and for all. He says that moving through space affects how you measure time, because the 3 dimensions of space and one of time are actually woven together into a single fabric that he called space-time. But how do we know that space and time are actually bundled up together into the space-time that the block universe is made of? Proof would eventually come in tests of Einstein's general theory of relativity, which he presented to the world in 1915. Back in the 1840s, astronomers had harnessed Newtonian gravity to discover an entirely new planet. Using Newton's equations to predict the future path of Uranus, they had found that it appeared to deviate from that path. The French astronomer Urbain Le Verrier pored over the equations for months, searching for an answer. Was Newtonian gravity wrong after all? Not quite. Le Verrier suggested that an unseen, more distant planet pulls on Uranus and affects its orbit. If correct, Newton's laws of gravity would be vindicated, and in 1846, Neptune was found. Despite this success, and although he didn't know it yet, Leverrier was about to hammer the first nail into Newtonian gravity's coffin. Planets don't have circular orbits, but slightly changing elliptical ones, with the Sun offset from the center. Newtonian physics claimed that these slightly changing orbits was due to the gravitational pull of the other planets, and Newton's equations were correct in their predictions for all of them, except one: Mercury. Leverrier realized this in 1859, and the search began for another new planet, but no such world was ever found. Instead, the answer came from Einstein. On the 18th of November 1915, he wrote a letter to the German mathematician David Hilbert. Today I am presenting a paper in which I derive out of general relativity the perihelion motion of Mercury, discovered by Leverrier. No gravitation theory had achieved this until now. Imagine the fabric of space-time as the surface of a trampoline. If you place something heavy in the center, it will sag in the middle. Likewise, the presence of a massive object like the Sun creates a dip in the fabric of space-time. Physicists call this a gravity well. Einstein was arguing that there is no Newtonian gravitational pull at all. It is merely a mirage. As the innermost planet, Mercury moves more deeply into the Sun's gravity well than its neighbors. The deeper it goes, the more the local space-time becomes curved, and it's this increased curvature that causes Mercury's orbit to change. For all the other planets, the curvature is subtle enough that Newtonian gravity gives the same answer. Only in the extreme gravitational environment that Mercury inhabits does Newtonian gravity show itself for what it really is: a good approximation. Gravity is not a pull. It's the result of curved space-time.
I don't know why they keep showing the moon. They're talking about Mercury just for the record, and they keep showing pictures of the moon.
Since then, astronomers have tested this idea in myriad ways, from solar eclipses to swirling black holes and rippling gravitational waves. And in every experiment, space-time passes with flying colors. Our entire cosmos of past, present, and future, merely a four-dimensional block of malleable space-time that just sits there. A supernatural being that could somehow look upon it from the outside world would clearly see yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
Now, I just want to make this point before I forget. Now, they are demonstrating things in 2D or 3D with 2D so that we can understand. What we got to understand is, remember that there was a model, there was a cube model in one of the previous videos which showed like the planet moving around and moving all space-time in three-dimensional. Okay, there's like what they're showing here is a flat representation of it warping away. Okay, but in reality, it's more like the cube that we saw in the previous video. So as it moves around, it moves like those coordinates kind of around. So now imagine, not imagine, because that's what's kind of happening, is if all the planets, the moon, every single object in that space has mass, and every single object is actually fluctuating that whole mesh. And so literally the orbits cannot be 100% measured because every single thing with mass is influencing every single thing. And this is to presume that because the sun has the biggest mass that we know of, that the sun is not also moving. But my gut feel is that the sun also moves, because even though the sun is much bigger than everything else and has larger mass, as we are told, everything is also got mass. So there is always a push and pull from every single thing in the 3D matrix. So it's impossible for anything to be standing still. And that's the perpetual motion kind of theory, I suppose, is that everything is in constant motion. Anyway, it's just one of my little thoughts.
Happily coexisting. But where did this all come from? As with everything else, scientists believe that the Big Bang birthed all of space-time. In other words, all of space and all of time. The regions of time we refer to as the past, the present, and the future are all there together in their entirety. And so it's as easy for two people to exist then and now as they do here and there. They can be separated by centuries of time, just as they can be separated by kilometers of distance. Any object within this block universe can be given 4 coordinates. 3 spatial to say exactly where it is, and 1 temporal to say exactly when it is. Imagine that an object's location in the block is marked by a dot. Even the dot of a physically stationary object moves because its time coordinate is constantly changing as second ticks after second, and today relentlessly becomes tomorrow. Join all the dots belonging to one particle, and you have a line that maps out its path through the block universe. A world line. You are nothing but a collection of particle world lines woven together, a knot in space-time, shedding and absorbing new world lines as you move towards the day the knot that is you undoes itself, or is undone.
And that's one of the theories why I often, when people say, well, what is time? They say, well, it's similar. It's not, but it is similar to a spiral. Okay, now people, even I'm beginning to understand why I explain it that way. Is because nothing is fixed and specific. So you're able to move through this whole space-time. This also accidentally proves reincarnation conceptually. Yeah, I would agree. So, you know, and I think on that notion is that astrology is a set of coordinates that will bring about a certain experience by certain parameters into the programming of this reality, this game, which it definitely does. I think people will argue with me, and they're fine to, they can quite. But I've said this before, is the one night, this was last year, I just had a thought where I said, well, astrology is actually like a time clock. You actually just dial it in. You dial in the coordinates to go to that specific experience. So now I'm thinking, well, if, that was my thought process at the time, that as I started to remember the stuff, and then I went to ask people, and it was confirmed in several ways. That, in a sense, is the reincarnation. That is time travel, because you're experiencing something very specific at a fixed point in an overall experience of what we are currently calling, or at least in this particular game, the Earth. We are not in Pleiades and we're not in Andromeda. We are currently experiencing life on Earth. So I do believe that. Now, I obviously we couldn't use astrology. I don't know. Perhaps we can to just simply go forward or backwards in times. But if the soul has the capacity to travel through and have all of these lifetimes, and definitely simultaneously, that is time travel. And in a sense, it means that we don't travel through time. That all of it exists at the same time, which is why we're able to have flashes backwards and forwards. And people, but we have this Hollywood impression that we, these paradoxes and things that if you go back in time, we will change it. Well, why not? Perhaps this brings another theory up, or another concept of this is, let's say we are running one simulation in this lifetime that is me, okay? But I'm traveling backwards and forwards in time and changing stuff. So I'm going, yeah, that didn't go so well. So perhaps remember that video at the beginning where the guy kept going back and giving him the envelope. So maybe I went back. They say I'm getting a flash now of energy. So this is obviously right. Or at least I'm on the right path. Okay, so getting more rushy. So perhaps it's the same. It's the same life, but I'm experiencing all the variables. So when I go back in time, and I say, okay, let's try this, and I rerun the simulation, but they're all kind of running at the same time, which blows human beings' minds because we don't experience it that. We experience it once off lifetime. But if they're all running at the same time, then you can theoretically go back in time. The soul goes back in time and gives a nudge, in time. Yeah, let's do it this way. It's like when you shoot a movie and you have the what they call the clap, I don't know what they call them. I forget now. The clapboard, and then they used to write in chalk take 2, take 3, take 3, take 4, take 5. It's the same script, but every time there's improvisation, there's errors in the lines, somebody forgets to say one word, so there's variances, and then they take all the best ones and they put together in the movie that you see. Okay, so each existence is very possibly that, what I've just said now. They all exist at the same time. In a sense, we can say every single possible variation can exist at the same time. I think the soul just decides which ones he or she, there's no sex, I'll just say he, mostly because I'm a man. That's the only reason. It's just, it'd be weird calling my soul she, so I just call him he. It really makes no difference because, like, as I said, they have no sex. Souls have no sex. So, for me, there would be no point in, I keep saying to people, there's no point in driving your car into the wall to find out that you could probably die. You wreck your car and die. There's no point in doing that. We already know this. We don't have to experience that to know it. Okay, that's intellectual understanding, living vicariously in a way through other people. So I believe all of this can exist all at the same time. The most interesting ones for the soul, I believe that the soul then goes in and does go back in time and changes things, but doesn't change the timeline. It just changes that simulation. And like in terms of like a computer, a quantum computer, it can hold, if you think about the universe as a computer, giant computer, which is why we call it the simulation, then it has the infinite processing power to have every single possible variation being able to run. But just like when you have a 3D game, the universe doesn't run every single possible, simulation at the same time. Like with the game, it's got loading scenes, so it has what they call LODs, LODs, I forget what it stands for. Low something is low. They're 3D objects, but they have very few points. So when the computer loads it, in the distance, your eye can't see it anyway, so it just sees a little blob. So it only shows you a little blob that your brain perceives as a tree. As you approach, it starts loading more detailed objects. When you're right up against the tree, then it shows you the fully blown model that has leaves on it and everything. Okay? That's how they're able to run open worlds. Load on demand. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it probably is. But that is the principle. So the same thing with our universe, like our Earth, like as a human being, I'm only experiencing like that right now. So technically, what is outside my walls, I'm streaming. So I can't see. I know that that side there is the avenue. Okay, so I know on that side there's the avenue, and it's busier than my street. But I can't see it. I can't prove it's there. I can sometimes hear noise, traffic noise, which is the same thing as a game. The perception is around your immediate world. So when you look at it that way, you don't actually need such a massive quantum computer as people imagine. You just need to be able to, the part of the soul that's in the body only needs the immediate environment. Which it's like Schrodinger's, I can't say it. I can never say it. Schrodinger's cat in the box. If we put a tape recorder in there and the box is closed, we can assume that his cat is in the box. Until we open the box, it doesn't show us a cat. So the computer game, then you open the box and you go, oh, there's just a tape recorder in there. He was lying, little fibber. Or, we open up the box and then we have the answer, no, it's not just a tape recorder. There's an actual kitten inside the box. That's the way the soul's simulation of that we call reality and real. So, for example, people say that there's an Eiffel Tower. Well, I don't know that because I've never been there. I went and knocked on the telephone. It's basically just a radio tower. It was put up to transmit radio, and then they never took it down. So I haven't gone there and knocked on the metal to hear it echo and to know it's metal. I just have reports about it. So for my world, the Eiffel Tower does not have to be rendered because I'm living here. Right now, I'm literally got probably about a 5 cubic meter space that has to be believable for me to have this experience. And for you guys, similarly. Okay, and so you are watching my simulated space through Twitch. And I think that's very important for people to realize. People just assume, poof, there's a whole Earth. And no matter where you go, no matter where you are on the Earth is fully detailed. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, because it only has to be detailed for you. And your experience has to be detailed around your experience. So in terms of it being a real 3D space, I don't think it's realistic. I don't feel like it's real. I feel like it is why I call it a simulation. Anyway, let me play some more of the video.
All the actions you will ever take, from what you'll have for breakfast every day, to if and who you'll marry, and the houses and jobs you'll flip between, are all entirely mapped out. You can't deviate from your journey any more than a train can deviate from its tracks. In this way, the block universe is like a book. The beginning, the middle, and the end are already written and unchangeable. Every choice you think you're making is actually pre-written, and so one that you are always going to make. A character caught in a love triangle on page 150 may be unaware that it gets resolved 50 pages later. But resolved it will be, and in the way it was always going to be. And this is why our time traveler from the opening story had to invent the time machine. An older version of them had already indelibly appeared on an earlier page. Their world lines eventually looped back round to intersect with themselves at a previous point. But can this really happen? Can you travel to the seemingly long-distant past, or indeed the far-flung future? If over then is no different to over there, it seems that the door to time travel is well and truly open.
All right, so, example, I was always going to reach Mexico, or I never was. That's this theory. Remember, they're just kind of going over theories, and they're just discussing theories, which is why I like these videos, because we need to look at them as just theories. For me, it's illustrating. People see it my way, then they see the universe as it is. So, no, I think you can change it. In fact, I've told you this. I told you this before you went to Scotland. The place isn't important. The place itself. I mean, sometimes there is a connection to it, that it's going to be a trigger. You're going to remember stuff. You can. I do believe there are, like with astrology, can predict with quite good accuracy. Like, for example, Edna, my late friend and guide, on and off guide, she was able to predict almost to the year, well, literally to the year, when I would begin to remember stuff, and stuff that happened last year was going to happen. She didn't quite understand what she was saying. I now do, having reached that point, having that marker, I do understand why it would be able to plot that particular point, like astrologically or mathematically, etc. Hi, Shaman. So the place itself is not always that important. Like, for example, for me going to Ireland, I don't believe Ireland was necessary at all. The experiences I went through, the struggles and the crap that I went through in Ireland, brought me to a new point in understanding and remembering. But the place itself, not important. I do think that the experience would have been a little bit different. Because of the location could be different, but I could have gone. In fact, it was a toss-up between England and Ireland, and I'd never been to either. And eventually, I just literally, but figuratively, literally threw a dart on the map and just went to Ireland. And I always say, when I'm feeling negative, I say that was a terrible decision. But it brought me along a path to where I'm glad I have this remembering now, where before I didn't. It would have happened no matter where I was. So it's given me a different perspective, a different understanding of things, which are not overly important to the soul, but it's an experience. So that, again, just to go kind of loop back to you, Barney. I don't believe, and I remember now I did a reading for you where I said leaving the UK is kind of optional. It's not actually something that is something that you have to do. And I believe that's actually true for most of us. The experience isn't in what's the term I'm looking for? Inextricably linked to the place, especially if we consider this as just a reality, a simulation. You can have that experience anywhere. It'll just be colored, I suppose, colored by your surroundings. So the place itself. I think for me there is. For 25 odd years, I've had an interest in the Maya specifically, which is why I do speak about the Maya, because there are many things. Like I had lots of books I used to read. I used to look online. I really used to do a lot of research. I had probably about 5 to 10 books, some of them were photographic books on the Maya, that I'd read from cover to cover. So, and I would read the book and say, but this is wrong. They're understanding this incorrectly. So for me, there's a connection, there's some sort of connection to this region. So I do believe in my path that for me, well, I've said I've come here to die. I mean, not that I'm going to kick the bucket tomorrow, but I've come here to die. This is, I was born in Africa, but I'm going to die on this part of the world. This is where I am going to live out the rest of my life. And I don't foresee any kind of event that would really would change that. Perhaps moving around within the region. Then, following the example, as an example only, why do I feel the burning? Well, I think a lot of us, I think there's a couple of answers to this. The one is the starseed answer, which it's so cliched. I was kind of sniggering a bit about it and making jokes about it, that, people feel like they don't belong. And most people feel like they don't belong because society is so fucked up. Society is a very bad model that's imposed on people. And then you're told, okay, you create society. No, society is designed and then you are forced to fit into society. So a lot of people will feel that they don't fit in because they don't. They actually do not fit in, because think of societies like this. I live here in this apartment at this point in time, so I'm familiar. I could probably walk around with my eyes blindfolded, and I would know where I'm going. Okay, but let's say somebody knocks me out over the head, and they put me in the flat in the front, which comes over the driveway and kind of along the street. That's a different layout, so it will be completely unfamiliar to me. Okay, so I would be lost. It'd be something different. So I would feel like I don't belong because I don't. It's not my apartment. It's not what I'm used to. Society is a lot like that. Like the soul, the human beings, like are what they are. But in society, they are forced into one apartment kind of thing, and that is prescribed for you, and that is what you must do, or you are a freak. So most people feel like they don't fit in because they don't. They don't fit into this cookie cutter stamp, cutout. All right, so let me read the chat again. Not to trigger anyone in a certain way. I finally understand what you mean about this being the end of the journey. Yeah, the end of the journey is like when you realize, that's what all this is. It's just a simulation. It's just an experience. And then you go, And that's what I say. It's like, imagine playing a game for the second time. And that makes sense. I don't feel as if I belong anywhere because I don't belong on this planet. Yes, because the soul, the human, the part of the soul that isn't the human, that's the ego. People say the ego has to die. No, the ego doesn't die. The ego just becomes aware of the soul, that the ego is not the full soul. It's just a little facet of the soul. So as we begin to realize that at the human ego level, we go, all right. So, and I'm getting an energy flash. Fuck off. Awesome. I'm speaking to myself. So, I'll go away. So I'm in charge. That realization that you are the soul, you just don't remember. It's like you have amnesia. So like somebody whacked you on the head and only part of your brain has been remembering stuff, and then suddenly there's a magic cure, or they whack you on the head again, and your brain, everything starts firing. Well, not everything, because we die. We wouldn't be able to cope with that kind of information. But you start to remember what the soul remembers, as opposed to only the human level. And when that begins to happen, that's what I call enlightenment. Some people are just born and they already know this, more energies. So when you're born as a baby and you know that you are awake in the dream, it's also a choice that the soul makes, more evolved souls. So then you don't belong anywhere, because you go like, for example, I love Mercedes Benz. I love the vehicles. I love the way they're made. I've had my late dad's one, mine, then the one that basically got stolen. So I love them. I love the way they are designed. I love that you get in it and everything's almost perfect. Yeah. So, but that's just an experience. It's just a sensation. So, like I can actually, which is kind of a little bit depressing, kind of bizarre, I can re-experience my previous calm. And that's why I say to people, the most important thing is when you're doing something, is to it's almost like a videotape, is to actually, like most people nowadays are just selfies. They just. Here's my broken phone. Like everywhere they go, it's a selfie. It's like it's a selfie. Everything's a fucking selfie. It's like this is the record that your soul's not getting, because you're so selfieing. And nothing. Okay, that makes sense. And I don't feel like I belong anywhere. Yeah, read that. And perhaps nothing ever will be, because it's not. But that hurts my ego. Of course, it hurts the ego, because the ego is in isolation. So the ego is me in this room. Okay, right now I can see the sun streaming through the windows. I wish I could show you. I should probably get a mirror or something. I can show you my environment. So that is my world. The ego, the little part of the soul that is the ego, is only experiencing this, which is why, this is the beauty of it, why we can experience, like right now, I'm starting to get warm again, because the sun is beating on this yellow wall and that wall where the light's coming through, and it's heating up the room. So this is my experience, and I'm starting to get hot. I want to put the aircon up. Earlier I was getting cold, now I'm getting hot again. But the soul itself knows it's a simulation, but is able to experience the experience through the ego. That's why the ego doesn't die. The ego it's like living vicariously through the ego. It's like watching movies on Netflix. You're watching something that you cannot control. You can't go in there and move the figures around and say, right, now you do this, you do that, which you can in a way with a game. So the ego, when the ego kind of begins to realize that, and goes, oh, wait a minute, I am in a game. I am in a simulation. And that's when I think that's when you begin to lose attachment to things. I mean, I still do. I mean, I have a few sentimental things that I've managed. I have a few sentimental things that are in my kitchen, for example, like a knife that is probably 50 years old that I brought with me when I immigrated the first time. I have another knife which is 5 years old, which I bought in Dublin. And I still have attachment to these things, because I feel like I have no attachment to anything. I'm completely rootless. And you think, well, that's a wonderful way to be, but for me it's not. It means that there's no more point to this life. I have lost all connection to this existence, all of it, because I can't get my things out of storage. Somebody offered to pay for them. Actually, a few people have offered. Well, one or two people. And I'm very tempted. I really am. I'm very fucking tempted, but it's still not going to resolve what I need to resolve right now. Yes, it's not about ditching the ego. It's about understanding that the ego is a micro experiencer and the soul is the macro experience. Very well put. And the over-observer, absolutely. So because the soul sees everything, it sees all the simulations, it sees all the variations, it's like you inside a game, you go, yeah, no, I'm going to send Lara Croft down that way, and I'm going to see if there's any secrets. In old games, they had all these secrets that we go, ring, and you would have this little bell. So the soul is able to control the game. Not that we are like manipulations, but I see it more like a nudge. So like we go back in time and say, yeah, maybe we just do it this way. We just see what happens, or let's experience that. Maybe we know what happens, but let's just experience it anyway. Okay. So the soul cannot have the experience because you can see everything. You can see all the permutations in real time, but he can't feel them until the experience is isolated into a human experience. This is why I don't understand people like I don't have anything against tantric sex, but there's a lot of people have this experience, there's this idea that orgasming is very, very bad and it drains your energy and it disconnects you from people. Like, I don't understand any of this. We have come here to experience these experiences. Like, why would you deny yourself? I mean, the opposite is become so addicted to it that you completely disregard the spiritual element of it, and that you just completely base and debaucherous and live in that. But I don't believe any extreme is actually what we're here to do. We're here to find balance, just like sitting on a mountain. Like I always say, life isn't about sitting on top of a hill like a monk. Not to say there's anything wrong with that. That's the experience that they have chosen. But that's not the only experience. There are many, many experiences that we can have, like driving really fast, driving really slow, going to space, doing all of these things. So being a monk on a hill, cross-legged and meditating for your whole life, that in a way, it can be what a person has chosen, but it's not experiencing life. It's experiencing a halfway point between physicality and spirituality. Now, the soul already knows the spiritual side. He's gone like, wait a minute, like I already know this shit. It's boring up here. We want new experiences. I want unpredictability. The soul, Bonnie, the soul is the player who has 100% completed the game. Yes, I agree. From all angles and has created the walkthrough for his friend to play it easier. Precisely. Well, I wouldn't even say it's a walkthrough. It's more just like a nudge. Like when you look at a friend and they're doing some task. Let's say, I don't know, something that you know very well, and they're busy with it. Maybe like you do crochet. Okay, so you know a lot about crochet. I know nothing about crochet. So let's say you're in the same room with me, and you're watching me, and I'm like, and I'm swearing, and I'm going red in the face and getting really annoyed, and you just nudge and you say, just slip it underneath and through, whatever it is. And I go, look at that. Isn't that cool? And then you go, and so like, if you had said nothing, I would have continued to struggle. Until eventually I figured it out, or I went to look at a YouTube or whatever. But because you nudged me and you gave me a nudge, I didn't spend 3 hours learning that particular thing. I just began doing it. My idea, Shamonic, my idea for the next 2 nights, go hard on the music streams to bid the cycle of my life a proper farewell. Close with a bang. My question is, are you gentlemen ready? Joe, I'm going to send you the keyboard. Thank you. So this is the thing. So this is the nudge. So we have this fixed idea, and I say we just to be collective. I don't. But we have this fixed idea that, like, you can't go back in time, because Hollywood says this. You can't go back in time and change anything because it changes time. Yeah, you're just simply exploring a different version of the same simulation. So it really doesn't matter. Silly peppers. Well, I'll be there. I'll probably be there. That was very funny. I know I keep bringing it up, but not to be nasty. I thought it was really quite. I thought it was quite funny. Red hot silly peppers. So I thought that was quite amusing. So I keep coming up with jokes with the silly peppers, including Brian has left. Brian's jumped ship to go tour with the red hot silly peppers. So this is the way I look at it, and I feel like these streams are very unattended by people, but I think they are very important. I put them on YouTube. That's why I try to keep it on topic for as much as possible until we get to this point where we kind of start going off topic, and then I can just cut it, and just keep that part on Twitch and on YouTube. So yeah, I feel like this to me is so important. I just watched the one video and I thought, oh, that's actually, and then it all just came. And I didn't even have this one. I didn't have to research very much because the videos just kept coming, literally one after the other, down one suggested list on YouTube. And I found everything I needed. I thought, okay, that's more than enough. I'm not like, this video is 48 minutes. We've only watched 16. We probably won't even watch the rest of it, Barney, yes, you experienced as Mr. Goth. You have experienced as Daughter Goth, yeah, as well. Now you have experienced Mrs. Goth, and you get the reference. Yes, but now there's a further element to that. Okay, you've experienced a Mr. Goth, Mrs. Goth, and Miss Goth, but they all exist at the same time with every possible permutation and variation. It's just whatever. It's like the TV channel. They don't all have to be playing at the same time. They just have to turn on when you are experiencing it. Shamanic, I love the collective souls have magnetized and aligned in the same frequencies lately. It's been so beautiful. Well, I think because this is the yogis also call it I forgot it. I've forgotten what it's called. Oh, for heaven's sake! I keep often bringing it up. I forget. Well, anyways, it's the end of times. So, and I do believe I've believed that since I was a child, that we are at the Kali Yuga. That's right. Thank you, Bon. I can't believe I forgot that. Where we are going towards a big reset. So things are accelerating because for a long time, human beings as a species or reality, whatever, have been in a comfort zone. Even if it's uncomfortable, they've been in a comfort zone. So now it's like the game, it's like, I can't see my arm. When you used to point to our watch. At times, we're coming to the end of the simulation. So like, I don't know if you guys remember, if you guys are old enough, to do the bumper cars, and you would get 3 minutes or 5 minutes to drive around, and then they'd cut off the electricity. It's kind of like our experience here. So we're kind of running out of time for this particular experience because it's time to move on to the next one. So the reset, I believe, is the time is not fixed, but I firmly believe, or I think I know, there will be within my time or the next generation's time. So that's like if I had children, it would be my time or my children's time at longest, the generation after that. It's not a full reset where this is the thing. It's a reset of the simulation. So maybe next time will be lizard people. Like people have the memories of this whole lizardness. It's not that it's either true or it's not true. It's a memory. It's not necessarily that we have lizard people living amongst us. It's that we could have been lizard people before. We could have been whatever the hell we wanted, whatever the hell we collectively were. And that also ended. So that movie experience goes, right, we're all bored with this shit now. Last one to leave, turn out the lights. And that's it. And that's existence, poof, just evaporates because there's no one left living it anymore. And then it's reset, whether at one point, it just gets reset. And then we all go back, what the Kali Yuga, and this is where I think they get it right, the yogis. We go back to pure God essence, which is true. They believe we go to pure God essence. I don't believe we go to pure God essence because the God as per se, as they believe in, does not exist in that way. But we do go back to pure spiritual essence, and then you'll sit there, arms crossed, sitting on this, like at the cinema, waiting for the next one to start. And I know that's very simplification of it. What could also possibly be is that I do believe there's also a lot of stories. Let me read the chat before I did just say this before. There's a lot of stories about people leaving this plane, including the Bible, and the wicked, etc., get left behind. I do believe that that's also a thing that enlightened people just go, all right, the show's over, the credits are running, the date's almost about to come up. We may as well leave the theater. And there's a lot of people who have not clicked onto that and will stay on, waiting for more stuff to appear, where a lot of the people have actually left the theater. So there's a buffer zone there as well. Now let me read the chat. Actually, I never remember to put it on a second delay or something, so it's not more than I can read. Agreed. 26-year cycle's coming to an end. Barney, it's a doorway into the next experience. Yes, I think so too. The door has opened. I think the doorway is kind of a very sort of human way of looking at it, but I do agree. It is, we are, I think, especially for enlightened people, we are halfway. This is why there's all these videos about saying the star seeds and stuff that they don't feel like they belong, because it's like we're sitting in the dark theater and the credits have run and we're going, this show's over, kids. No, there's more coming. And we're sitting there, no, this show is over, kids. And they go, no, there's more coming. Sit and be quiet. There's more coming. And we're going, no, this is it. we have come to the end of the cinema experience. We now need to get out. They're going to throw us physically out of the cinema. A new cycle of unconditional love and light. I think so. That's what the yogis. Let me actually. That's what the yogis talk about, going back to pure God. What do they call it? God essence. I think that's part of Barney. Yes, it's not the end of times in the sense of God. Yeah, it's not like the hammer of God comes down and smashes the earth and everything's dead. It's not like that. It's more of just an evolution out of the one simulation into a new one. There's a sequel coming. Yeah, because I think there always is. The soul gets bored and needs. And like, for example, imagine being reborn and reborn and reborn and reborn and reborn as a human over and over and over and over. Eventually, like us, we just get tired of the same, because it's the same thing over and over. And we kind of begin to remember very early on that this is just that same repetition. So we have to kind of change the parameters. The door is more like a birth canal. Yeah, I suppose. Well, that's Kali Yuga, as the yogis call it. I believe that is the birth canal into the new life. Hi, Daily Sims. No, I'm not doing any readings at all today. Not doing any readings. I might do towards the end of the stream. Maybe I might do some readings. But no, we would just be, it's kind of at the end of the stream. We've just been discussing time and the universe and how it relates, in how scientific theories actually explain the universe in a spiritual sense. How it actually is. So we're not doing readings. Most people don't turn up anyway when I do card readings anymore. So it's too much effort to lay everything out. So now we're just kind of randomly talking about spirituality, as Shaman said. Thank you. Last month or so, I just stopped streaming, but I do like these things. I've actually got another one planned. I've got another one or two I actually did research for, but then I kind of just stopped streaming because it just feels like, it could take me like 5, 6, 8 hours to research the stuff, so that it gives me an overall topic that one video leads to the other, and it kind of paints a picture as opposed to just random videos. I know you are tapped in, that's why. Who's this? Who do you mean? The people. Now I have to go have my bath. Might be back in a bit. I will come back soon. Awakening. Yeah, but he streams very, very late for you. Yeah, the thing is that you come on, like for me, if Barney is either 7 or 8 hours, depending on if they fiddle the clocks. And you are you usually come on at about 11 my time. 10, 11 when you come on at night for you. So for Barney, it's really, really late. It's like literally in the middle of the night. Unless he wakes up very early in the morning, then it's very, very late for him. Okay. It's fine. Yeah, so you're 7 hours. For me, it's 5 o'clock, 5:11. Yeah, so you're still at 7 hours. I think when you move the clocks now in winter, you will be 8 hours. So then you will be or you'll be in 1 hour earlier. I 1 to 2 hours. You might be an hour. I don't know. I can't get this kind of spatial reality in my head, because I know when I was in South Africa, it was always an hour to 2 hours behind. So you might be 1 hour closer to me. I can't figure that out. It's way too confusing. Yeah. So I think that there was the Star Seeds 2 streams that we had, which I think it's not like right. See, human beings usually think like if you're 20, you think, oh, it's happening right now. What's the latest one? What's the last one? I forget what the last one is. I forget now. When I did the stream, I looked at it. But like I was explaining during the Star Seed theme, I was born in 69. So technically the first one was, which was me, I think, which was the indigo. No, it wasn't the indigos. It was the blue something. I can't remember what it was. But as I explained in those two videos, those two streams, is that like I'm not stuck with a label. So the very first one that was my generation, I just kind of got into it kind of thing. As a 54-year-old, I'm supposed to have moved and evolved through every single stage. The reason why we have all these stages, like now we have it was the Indigo Kids, but we're even beyond the Indigo Kids. I forget now the different categories. Is that we are sorry. Stop it, distracting me. So there's like what shamanic awakening is saying. We have a progressively more awakened human beings being born because we've been laying down the ground rule, the groundwork. So the first people that came spoke just a little bit about stuff like the hippies, and they spoke about things in a light way to introduce people to it, like what the bad people do through indoctrination and socialization, all of this. They do it slowly. So likewise, the star seeds, as people call them, have come in stages. So every new star seed generation is born speaking more of the truth, more awakened. It's not that they're more in tune, they actually are more in tune. It's not that they're better. It's that they are adapting the program to more awakened states. Because if you just come in and you say, like if we had, forget what the last generation of the star seeds are, but let's say they came in when I was born, people go, these fucking people are crazy. Let's put them in a padded room. They've been smoking too much of the good stuff, So it has to be. So it's essentially been about, I think it started with 50s. So we're looking at 50s. It was talking about 70 years, which is about a lifespan of getting people used to this kind of conversation, this kind of information that we are collectively beginning to understand in more deeper nature. So, as I said, so my task was to be born at that initial stage. Was that the initial or the second one? I can't remember. I think it was the second one. The blue something or other. It was, forget now. So then, through the decades, we are supposed to evolve. We're not just supposed to be stuck, well, I'm an indigo child. Yeah, that means nothing. There was a time period that's actually gone. That time period is gone. You're now supposed to have evolved from the indigo children to the next stage, It's not like being born an indigo child and then you think, that's it. No, that's purely a name given to a state of evolution, soul, and also the ego, which is part of the soul. Anyway, so we are supposed to evolve with those periods and become increasingly more enlightened. Like, I mean, I was born in the 60s by 1 year. So technically, the 60s was really what is seen as an age of free love and blah, 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 and a lot of drugs and a lot of, it was really a reaction to the overly oppressive society, which is kind of always there. It's just that we remember the 60s as being this expression of self and free love and all that. But that was just the reaction to the oppressiveness of those times. Like the 20s was an expression of extreme wealth on some levels for some cultures. So there was just this decadence and swinging and all of that. But that was that's kind of, the 60s wasn't just about drugs and Woodstock. That was just a reaction to the oppressiveness. Similarly here as well. So, we can't just say, well, 60s is just full of drugged up people. Well, no, because there was just a few people that were drugged up and singing hippie songs. The rest were in an office. They were in an office like we are now. That doesn't change. Anyway, so we are supposed to evolve with the times and gradually just become more and more aware of stuff. And that's what we're supposed in this particular phase, because I think in some ways we've had a long period where nothing really happened. This existence has been ruled by some very unpleasant people who do some very unpleasant things and continue to do so to today. It's getting worse and worse and worse. So this awareness, as the whole indigo, star seeds, all the different types, is here to get people to remember who they are. They're not just a simulation of war. We are living in a time where it's cult of fear. Everything is about fear. Fear of losing what you got, fear of losing your life, fear. Everything is fear. Everything you watch in the media, fear of not being pretty enough. That's what magazines push out. Okay, there's nothing wrong with beauty. I love beauty. Trust me. Being human, you're supposed to appreciate beauty. That's the beauty of it, is you appreciate beauty. And everybody's got a different kind of idea of what beauty is. But everything is a cult of fear. So when you look at a Cosmopolitan, you look at GQ, you look at all these things, and they are projecting a particular image. And I mean, you can find it attractive. There's nothing wrong with it. But most of it is not attainable. So there's the cult of fear that you will never measure up. And you won't. You will never measure up to it, because this is a construct. Like, we've taken a very good-looking man, stuck him on the cover of GQ or in great clothes. The reality, he's probably got bad breath. Maybe he does drugs. Maybe he's a sociopath. You don't know. We have this static impression that, and then our minds continue to put layers on top of that person. Well, this person's very good looking. He's got a beautiful suit. So therefore, he must also be a good person. He must be surrounded by lots of good people. He must have lots of money. Blah, blah. So there's the fear of that's where the term FOMO, fear of missing out, has come from. The beautiful has become the trigger of fear. Beautifully put, Jezza. It literally has. And you've got to look at it that way. Beauty itself is not a problem. But we live in perpetual fear, myself included. I mean, I don't exclude myself out of that. It's just like I'm kind of old enough. I say, look, by and large, I stopped caring, because I've stopped looking young 5 or 10 years ago. Well, maybe not 10, but 5 to 10 years. I stopped looking young. I now look my age. I used to look very young. I've always looked very, very young. Also, I don't have hair now, so that's one thing. I keep saying that was a big surprise when I started losing my hair, because it was quite late. It was like in 40s when I really started noticing that there was hair loss. So the youthfulness is gone, the physical appearance. But in a sense, that's also liberating, because I'm never going to look young again. I can look young for my age, but I'm never ever going to look like I did when I was 40. Because when I was 40, I could so easily pass for 30 or even late 20s. It would be very easy. If I told somebody, if I was even up to about even close to mid 40s, if I had said to somebody I was 32, they would have believed me. And that would be like a 15-year-old lie kind of thing, that doesn't happen to you. But anyway, it is liberating, because, you can either sit and worry about it the rest of your life, or you can just say, okay, this is the way it is now, and just move on. So, but everything is designed to instill a fear of missing out, a fear of not being good enough. So that's why I say we live in a culture of fear. We don't live in a culture of embracing diversity. We are forced to embrace diversity, which is not the same thing as embracing diversity. We are forced to do it. That's the whole movement of the last, 15, 20 years has been this forced indoctrination of political correctness. We have been forced into being politically correct. And that's not healthy, because it's not something natural, it's something forced. And that again becomes a fear. So the political correctness has been a very clever tool that's been applied, and it works beautifully, because if you tell a group of people something on repeat, people will begin to repeat it, and eventually say, okay, where does that come from? Oh, I don't know, everybody knows this. No, we don't all know this. I do not know this. I hear you people talk about it. That's when I exclude myself from the population. I hear you saying this, but you don't tell me where it started, how it started, where's the factual evidence to support this. I just see you repeating this information. Yeah, we are forced to act like we are. We are forced into this is why it's an impossible achievement, because it keeps you perpetually busy. So society is designed to keep you aspiring to something that society actually prevents you from achieving. So the only way to be like this model, supermodel looks and things is to have money, because you have to have the money to eat properly, to have a life of leisure, so you have time to exercise and to be all of this. You have good headdresses, good clothing, good cars, good houses, all of this stuff. So you need to have money. Now, the elite keep all the profits to themselves. So it's a very small club. So it's an impossibility in this realm. You cannot achieve that, because if you achieved it, then everybody would have the same amount of money, and money would have no value. The wealth would have no value, which kind of doesn't. But at the moment it does. So they keep you aspiring to something that they have put a glass ceiling on that you cannot achieve. So therefore, because you cannot achieve it, you keep trying to achieve it, and it keeps you busy. It keeps you from focusing on the fact that you are actually on a hamster's treadmill. And this is the treadmill, the unachievable dream, the American dream. The American dream is to blah, 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 blah. I said, but that's not the elitist dream. The elitist dream is to have you chasing this dream that you will most likely never achieve within the framework of society. And also, if you have money, you spend it on shit. Yeah, that's the whole other market of having the knockoffs. It's not, and we know this for a fact. Okay, that for example, luxury brands. Well, some are lately. In the old days, that would be true. This day and age, the cheap stuff really is fucking cheap and nasty in most cases. But like, I actually have. I don't remember which brands it was. I think it was Marantz and like Philips or something. I forget now. I speak under correction. Now, this is like going back many years, probably like 20 plus years. And I was in a hi-fi section of I think a hypermarket. And the guy selling stuff actually showed me something I'd never known, or I kind of never really looked into. And he took two devices. Okay, one was like, I don't know what price, but let's say it was twice the price, and this one was 1,000, that was 2,000. And he flipped both machines over. And where's my camera? So microphones in the way. So he flipped them both over like this, so we could read the underlabel. Like these days, we don't have underlabels on anything anymore. Like this, he'd flip it over, and he showed me, like, what does that say? Jelly Seacomb. So he showed me the bottom of the two machines. And he said, look at it. They are made in the same place. They've got exactly the same specs, and they've got exactly the same styling, the label. They just changed the name. So he said, this is actually that product, but that one is more expensive. And I don't remember what it was. So a lot of the brands know that not everybody is going to afford a luxury item, but they will buy the knockoff to feel like it. So many brands actually grey market their own products, because they have a choice. Okay, you can sell 1% of your products to 1% of the population can afford it, or you can sell 50% of your products to everybody at a lower price. And then you say, oh, this black market, these knockoffs and things are ruining us. Okay, I'm not saying that it doesn't exist in actual black market where they do copy, because that is absolutely a real thing. Okay, that's what they don't like. They don't talk about the ones that they actually make and then sell as inferior products. And I know for a fact, even for myself, an actual fact, because there was a factory called Jason Michael. It wasn't very well known. And it was called Jason Michael because they produced Jason Michael jeans. And they were way out. It was quite a distance we'd have to drive outside of Johannesburg. But once you were there, you were there, you would see all these brands. You would see Levi, I think, I speak under correction, you see Levi, you see all the brands that people would go to the very expensive stores and would pay a lot of money for those jeans. Okay. If you went there, it was one factory. There was just people sewing them. They were just fucking sewing the shit by the dozen and then sticking on the label. And then off it would go. Like there was a store called Fushini Fashions, which was always more expensive. So you'd see jeans there that just had the label on it. They were all made in the same factory by the same people with the same materials. Okay, so there was, in some cases, there would be a slightly different material. You know, that would change. But they were made in the same place by the same people. So technically, and they wouldn't sell them. I only found out because I happened to see some, because occasionally I got into the factory and I saw them. I said, "Can you not sell them?" They said, "No, because you're not supposed to. They make here." I said, "But I won't tell anybody." He said, "No, we just cannot. This is how we produce the garments under license, under what's it called? Under license. So the terms and agreements of the license is that you do not sell them from the factory, and you do not you don't make wide known that they are making everything in the same factory. It's made under license, and you'll see that about most things. Most products will say, you know, made in China under license. So they'll be making the cheap shit and the expensive shit in the same place. Obviously, the quality, you know, you can't produce high quality things for very, very cheap. I mean, that's an obvious thing. But for the most part, specifically in the older days, these days they find a way of manufacturing things incredibly cheap. Okay, so they do make things like very, very, very cheap electronic devices. Back in the old days, the development time would be too long to take a very high-end piece of equipment and make it cheap. It was only when they found ways to make it cheap that they then made very cheap variations and knockoffs. Back then, they would just make the same hi-fi, but sell it at a lower price. They would still make a profit, but it wouldn't be it would never compete with their brand names. So, and I don't know how I got into that conversation. But that kind of goes on. Oh yeah, it was about the fear of missing out on that. So I've never particularly cared. So when I saw that, for example, as well, like I was already buying the lower end market, you know, because I kind of like that brand. I never had an issue with it. It was just interesting when things like that are pointed out to me. But so I would have pretty much the same device, made by the same company, same place, but it wouldn't cost me as much. Now, these days, it's very easy to replicate very, very cheap electronics. I mean, even Samsung, I mean, the phone I've got now, you know, is relatively inexpensive, and it's not bad quality. Well, yeah, I mean, China, they kind of don't really care too much about copyright and stuff like that. And I think it's on purpose, because it allows big companies to protest that things are being produced. You know, they get to preserve the image, because honestly, to be true, if they really wanted to first of all, okay, if you don't want people to copy your particular product, don't have it made in a country that is known for decades and decades and decades. This has been happening many, many decades. They've been ripping off. They analyze something and then they reproduce it cheaper, okay, a cheap knockoff. Okay, then don't have it made there. If you have such a big issue with this, don't support that country. Don't make your stuff there. Make it in the United States of America. Like in the old days, things were made. Like Texas Instruments were an American company. Then they were bought. And they were moved to you know, now they don't exist anymore. But they would have moved off to China. Apple, Google, all of these companies, they all designed. You'll see on the back of most products. I don't have where's my iPod? You wouldn't be able to see because it has Velcro. I used to stick it onto this little one. It will say designed in California, whatever it was, but then it's made in China.